Well, good evening and hello, kids and cubs, and welcome to a special edition of the True North Eager Beaver. Not so much the Daily Beaver Morning Show, but the Daily Beaver Morning Show nights. And I'm hearing the thing go again, and I do not know why that's doing that. Oh, yes, I forgot. I heard the breaking news theme music going on in my head again, but that's because the YouTube channel has a 30-second delay and the volume was on instead of mute. So I was hearing that double me. But now everything's all right again. All right. So glad you're here. A little bit of a last minute thing. I was at home and the announcement that was supposed to be earlier today was delayed. So I figured, well, why not do a live watch party with the Dam fam and see what's going on? And so, welcome everyone to a special breaking news live watch party of the Alberta Pipeline Implementation Agreement announcement, the next phase of it. Tonight is the night where we get to see what Alberta technically brings to the potluck. However, there has been some interesting set of developments here. As you know, the Prime Minister was recently in the North, and that was after three major projects were confirmed um, to be uh, deemed as fast-tracked under the Building Canada Act, according to Peter Zimonjic on June 24th. This is says the Liberal government wants a Northwest Territories highway, an Arctic deepwater port, and a nuclear waste storage facility in northwestern Ontario to be listed as projects of national interests. Minister in Yellowknife announced on Wednesday of that week that the government is initiating the process towards potential listing of the Mackenzie Valley Highway, the Grays Bay Road and Port, and the Deep Geological Repository as projects of national interests. The Mackenzie Valley and Grays Bay projects, which were referred to the Major Projects Office in March, could be named projects of national interest as early as the fall. Government officials say they would be the first projects the Carney government gives that designation. So these would be projects that would not only go to the Major Projects Office for help, but that would be designated under Bill C5 that was passed earlier. You got Pierre Poilievre that keeps on telling us that no major projects have been approved because none of them have gone through C5, without coming to the conclusion that if we have projects that don't necessarily have to go through C5, that's all the better, right? Because they're projects that go through C5 are the ones that are going to be more contentious and will probably have more attempts at litigation or people trying to stop. So now there will be three that will go through that office quite potentially. And therefore, maybe that will quiet them down. But there are 23 projects that have been referred to the Major Projects Office for help with or without C5 designation. And then it goes on to say the repository project was referred to the MPO on Wednesday. This is about building Canada strong for all natural resources, Minister Tim Hodgson said. We will build in partnership with Indigenous people, respecting rights and treaties. We will build by maintaining world-class environmental standards so we can do things right the first time. And we will build by making clear to the world that Canada is willing and able to move major projects from possibility to reality. Officials speaking on background in advance of the announcement said referring these projects to the MPO does not mean they are being rubber stamped, only that they are being considered under the Building Canada Act for speedy approval. Bill C5, Prime Minister Mark Carney's legislation to speed up approvals for major infrastructure projects identified as being nation building, passed last year. The second half of the bill, the Building Canada Act, enables the federal cabinet to pick projects from a list supplied by the Major Projects Office, approve them upfront, and streamline the process for navigating federal and provincial laws, environmental reviews, and the permitting process. Being listed as a project of national interest by cabinet is supposed to speed up approval times from 5 years to 2 by introducing a one project, one review approach instead of having federal and provincial approval processes happen sequentially. The Grays Bay Road Port would include the construction of a 230-kilometer road from the Nunavut border to the Grays Bay on the Arctic Ocean, where a deepwater port and airstrip would be built. Officials speaking on background explained that the export terminal and airstrip could have both civilian and military uses, depending on the results of a further assessment by National Defense. The proponent for the project is the West Kittimiut Resources Corporation, whose major shareholder is the Kittimiut Inuit Association. The description of the project on the MPO website says it would, quote, enable new resource exploration and development in the mineral-rich Slave geological province of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. Transport Minister Stephen McKinnon said the federal government has already provided more than $21 million to advance the project, which the minister said would provide year-round access to global markets. The Mackenzie Valley Highway is a proposed 800-kilometer all-season gravel highway that would extend from Wrigley, Northwest Territories, to the Dempster Highway south of Inuvik, Northwest Territories, passing near communities currently accessible only by air, water, and a winter road. The project would reduce the distance from Yellowknife to Inuvik by about 1,200 kilometers, cutting travel time from 38 hours to roughly 23. Wow, that's significant. This project will have a lasting impact on the quality of life of Northerners, McKinnon said. And located in the northwestern Ontario near Wabigoon, Lake Ojibwe Nation, the underground nuclear waste storage facility will consist of of a network of underground tunnels and rooms that will be used to store waste from Canada's current roster of nuclear reactors. The proponent for the project is the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, NWMO, and not for profit established by Canada's nuclear electricity producers in 2002 to safely manage the long term storage of used nuclear fuel in Canada. In a statement, the federal government said the project is part of its nuclear energy strategy and will help unlock projects that will boost investment and create jobs. Quote, that these three projects reflect our determination to use every tool available to build the infrastructure Canada needs and to deliver major projects more efficiently, McKinnon said. Building commercial corridors, McKinnon said, will reinforce Canada's supply chains, create good jobs, and support northern communities as well as Canada's Arctic sovereignty. With Wednesday's announcement, the number of projects referred to the MPO is now 16, which, when combined with the 7 transformative strategies the government has also recommended to the MPO, represents what Hodgson says is a combined investment in this country of more than $138 billion. So when we say 23 projects, it's really 16 specific projects and then 7 particular transformative strategies, I guess, that the MPO is either playing a key role in or somehow spearheading. These major projects will create tens of thousands of well paying jobs for Canadians, Hodgson said. They build our energy, mining, and electricity and transportation sectors and beyond that, and they demonstrate to the world Canada's ambition from coast to coast to coast. Once a project is submitted to the MPO by a government, industry group, company, or Indigenous group, it is evaluated against 5 factors laid out in the Building Canada Act. Those factors consider whether the project will boost the country's autonomy, resilience, and security, provide benefits to the country, have a high likelihood of execution, advance the interests of Indigenous peoples, and contribute to clean growth and climate change objectives. The MPO then conducts a further examination of the project before recommending it to the minister responsible and the Prime Minister, who will decide if it will be added to Schedule 1 of the Building Canada Act, granting it the fast tracking privileges. In a post on social media, Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs dismissed Wednesday's announcement as, quote, of course, an illusion. Quote, Mark Carney promised projects at speeds once thought unimaginable. Instead, Canadians got the same liberal delay, bureaucracy, and spin that blocks jobs, resources, investment, and infrastructure, she said. Ontario Energy Minister Stephen Lecce said the Deep Geological Repository will strengthen Ontario's position as a global leader in nuclear energy with a made-in-Canada nuclear supply chain. In partnership with Indigenous communities and all levels of government, this project will strengthen Ontario's competitive advantage by creating jobs and generating clean electricity for generations to come. So that happened earlier on. I realized while I was reading that I forgot to thank our sponsors, the Peppermaster, the Miss V Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, and PsychicTarot.ca. And I forgot to ask how your mental health is doing today. I'm doing very well. Despite getting a great night's sleep, I still needed a nap this afternoon, and I slept as well. So now I'm feeling the most rested I've felt in a good long time. So I was sitting at home, and like I said, the announcement hadn't come this morning, and I figured, well, why not make this an opportunity for us to get together and share share a little bit of information and time together, especially since there have been some big developments. So this is something that happened a little bit before, right? If we're talking about changing the way that we do business and making sure that we have the ability to transport through the country and out of the country that which we are going to be able to exploit at a larger scale with regard to our resources, these are projects. These are the types of projects that need to be taken care of. So again, you can see certain pieces of the puzzle. So that was around the 24th of June. And then, as we talked about on our show earlier, the Prime Minister was up in the north right before Canada Day in order to meet with the ITK. And there they were looking at advancing the priorities of the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee. And there was a bit of a readout from that from the government's perspective here that says the leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a renewed Inuit Crown partnership grounded in Inuit self-determination and improved outcomes for Inuit. They focused on the central role of Inuit in shaping the future of the Arctic, including Arctic sovereignty, defense and security, Arctic foreign policy, and global leadership. The Prime Minister underlined the federal government's ongoing work to support Inuit Nunangat, backed by a comprehensive plan of more than $40 billion to defend, build, and transform Canada's northern and Arctic region. This will extend to the work of the Major Projects Office to help deliver major projects. The leaders spoke of the ICPC as a model for collaborative work between Inuit and Canada that can help advance dual use infrastructure and major projects. President Obed stressed the importance of meaningfully involving Inuit as partners in decision making and long term strategic planning, and to ensuring that federal approaches reflect Inuit knowledge, priorities, and presence across the region. Improving the quality of life for Inuit remained a key focus throughout the meeting. To that end, the leaders discussed addressing cost of living pressures, including food security and housing, and the imperative to advance Inuit-led solutions to address these challenges across Inuit Nunangat. They took note of the progress made since the last meeting of the ICPC co-chaired by Prime Minister Carney and President Obed last year. This includes the commitment to finalize the framework for a program to replace the Inuit Child First initiative. The leaders discussed work to support Inuit-led institutions and services and improve socioeconomic outcomes across Inuit Nunangat, including working through federal channels to address governance and accreditation of Inuit Nunangat University, as well as continued work to reform Nutrition North Canada and implement the Inuit Nunangat housing strategy. They looked forward to discussing these priorities further at an Inuit First Ministers meeting in the fall. Building on the progress achieved together, the leaders concluded the meeting by reaffirming their shared commitment to sustain collaboration to support strong, healthy Inuit communities across Inuit Nunangat. So that happened. Again, another piece of the puzzle that you want to have happening, making sure that there is the buy-in for these projects, and of course, that there is going to be the environmental component, as mentioned, and that they will advance Indigenous interests. So that part is taken care of. Yesterday, he did Canada Day. The three leaders of the Inuit community, the Métis community, and the First Nations community were there. So again, this sort of ties together. He goes to Edmonton and has some Canada Day activities there. So doing his bit for the national unity discussion on Canada Day in Alberta, as one would expect given the current context. And then today we found out that the Prime Minister was in British Columbia, making another very substantive announcement. And this is a major deal with British Columbia, and it comes on top of what was just announced in earlier June. Because if you remember, around June 18th, the Prime Minister, I believe, was in British Columbia again then, and they announced a landmark new partnership between the Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia to transform, connect, and modernize communities across the province. Over the next 10 years, Canada's new government will be investing more than $5 billion in British Columbia's local infrastructure. So nearly $1.6 billion over 10 years, matched by British Columbia for a total of up to $3.2 billion to lower development charges for multi-unit housing by up to 50% in priority communities, saving up to $40,000 per unit, and expand housing enabling infrastructure such as water systems, wastewater systems, and local roads. And more than $600 million over 3 years, matched by British Columbia for a total of up to $1.2 billion to modernize and expand health infrastructure such as hospitals, emergency rooms, urgent care centers, and other critical facilities so more British Columbians can get faster healthcare when they need it. And then up to $50 million over 5 years to support community infrastructure projects in coastal communities, with priority to projects in Terrace and Prince Rupert. Then, to further accelerate home building in British Columbia, the Government of Canada has introduced legislation that would provide a one-time transfer of $284 million to British Columbia to reduce barriers to new construction. And then also more things announced. Probably you heard of this part, which was the new Canada-British Columbia partnership on condo conversion, which is a plan to leverage innovative financing tools to convert more than 2,200 vacant condo units into priority growth areas into affordable homes. This is one of the fastest and most efficient ways to increase housing supply, welcoming British Columbians to new affordable homes as quickly as possible. This is the thing that you've been hearing Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives scream about, saying it's a bailout. It's not. We'll get to that in another episode, but that was part of this whole big deal here that was made at that point. Then, through the Canada Public Transit Fund, the federal government will invest $2.5 billion over 10 years to build new transit projects such as the Surrey Langley SkyTrain extension project that is currently underway and increase service and access and frequency in high traffic areas. This funding is in addition to the $852 million previously announced by the federal government to support TransLink and BC Transit. So the federal government has been making a lot of announcements like this. They had some on Ontario with Ontario recently. They also had it just popped into my mind and popped out with Quebec, right? With Premier Fréchette. So, again, some basic infrastructure announcements to help support the province and bring in some investment into things that either need to be repaired or things that need to be built for future projects to then be able to work. And then, of course, it says Canada and British Columbia are also partnering to build new infrastructure for the community of Tumbler Ridge, including a new secondary school and renovations to the local health center. The federal government and the provincial government will each provide $100 million for construction, which is expected to begin as early as this summer, starting with the removal of the existing school. And we can all understand why that would be the case and that would be necessary. So that type of announcement happened. And then building on top of that today, um, came another announcement, and this is called a new cooperative prosperity partnership to build a stronger, more sustainable economy. Now, again, this is from the Government of Canada perspective. Hopefully, we'll have more on the BC perspective. And there are probably some clips that we'll be able to show at another time or later today, but we don't want to cut into the time of the announcement in Alberta. So, with this here, it says that the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, signed a new Canada-British Columbia Cooperative Prosperity Agreement, which will further accelerate the construction of major energy and trade corridors throughout the province, including LNG Canada Phase 2, Ksilisms LNG, Cedar LNG, and Wood Fiber LNG. The federal government will work with the proponents, communities, and First Nations to accelerate the permitting, financing, and construction of these projects to boost LNG supply for Canadians and our allies. Then the Red Chris mine expansion, that's one of the projects that was referred to the Major Projects Office. We will invest $500 million to expand Red Chris mine, which will increase Canada's annual copper production by more than 15%, support critical minerals demand for clean energy and manufacturing, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over 70% once operational. The North Coast Transmission Line, we will provide $3.9 billion through various tools towards the capital costs of phases 1 and 2 of this project to deliver clean, reliable, and affordable electricity to communities across British Columbia. The project has the potential to create $10 billion in new economic activity while reducing emissions by up to 3 million tons annually. It will become the backbone of a clean energy corridor, including a proposed Yukon-British Columbia grid connect that will increase the Yukon's energy security and affordability, as well as a potential interconnect with Alberta to optimize power reliability and sustainability in that province. So that's a big portion of the electrification strategy that he also announced a little bit earlier, I think maybe about a month ago now. In parallel, Canada and British Columbia are building the trade infrastructure we need to ship Canadian energy to new markets around the world, including transforming the Port of Vancouver Roberts Bank trade corridor. The federal government will invest in infrastructure upgrades to Roberts Bank Terminal, expanding the capacity of the port to ship new export markets overseas. This project will unlock over $100 billion in new trade capacity and add approximately $3 billion to Canada's economy every year. And if you are thinking a little ahead, well, why would they be investing the money in transforming the Port of Vancouver? Maybe that has something to do with where the pipeline is going to ultimately end. It's kind of looking like not going the northern route is going to be the way forward. And in the press conference, It was literally stated rather firmly and unambiguously that anything having to do with the moratorium for the Hecate Strait and that whole area, that was not going to be touched. That was going to be maintained because the Premier of British Columbia did make the case very well that a lot of BC development was reliant on that being the case. And, um, but then, said that he understands that there is no right for the government of British Columbia to block it. He won't be taking this to court again and all that kind of stuff. So it was really meaningful that the Prime Minister would stop in to get BC's thoughts on this and actually make it such that the province of British Columbia can maintain its investments and the condition it required while still ensuring that there's another pipeline that will get to the West Coast. One of the things about that MOU agreement, very specifically, is that it said that it was a pipeline to the West Coast and not to a specific area. So you're going to see conservatives, their first knee jerk reaction to this, they're already doing that, is that they're complaining that they didn't get to choose the route as well. They're already doing that. Right now, it doesn't make sense, and it's economic, yeah, yeah, and all that kind of stuff. The point is, do you want a pipeline or not? And do you want it fast, or do you want it whenever? Because this is the route that allows you to get one built as quickly as possible. That's probably going to meet with the less resistance and the least amount of protest. So, if you are a pragmatist and you are a risk manager by trade, which the Prime Minister seems to be, and he really wants that pipeline built because it's one of the critical pieces to Canada becoming an energy superpower in his estimation, then the Prime Minister has no time to waste on a fight about geography. So you approve the moratorium, it helps BC in the long run, it helps the Prime Minister in his objective of getting even more projects approved, because there were some of his projects that were probably even threatened by that. And it's Alberta, hey, right? You've been asking for a lot of concessions because ever since that MOU has been put into place, the government of Alberta has been not very good at meeting its end of the bargain, and even showing goodwill at wanting to meet its end of the bargain. So maybe one of those concessions in exchange for all of that lack of bad faith was that this is where the route of whatever pipeline is to be approved, assuming again that you can bring us a proponent. That's the one that's going to go by. And so yeah, you have a Premier EB saying that he understands that, and it's with this agreement that it's his job to be acting in good faith, which is going to be disrupting the BC conservative narrative that EB was being obstructionist and was trying to kill the sector and all that kind of stuff. When the reality on the ground is that the Premier EB was always saying, "I do not oppose this project in and of itself. If you want to get more oil to the West Coast, here's the way to do it. Here's the path. Here's the route. Here's what I'm happy to support. Here's what I'm happy to go to my province and my constituents and sell." And Alberta, for some reason, wanted to do it another way. So David Eby's position always was is that I'll be happy to support this, so long as you take a little input from us with regard to the route and don't want to blow up our projects because so that you can have yours. And it seems that ultimately they've gotten there. How hard the Prime Minister had to put his foot down and what concessions eventually had to be made to get there, I don't know. But the Prime Minister seems to be pretty focused on what will it take to get this done. And so we're seeing it here with these types of announcements. Um, and then the other things that were mentioned here is the George Massey Tunnel Replacement Project, We will provide up to $3 billion to replace the aging 4-lane transport tunnel along Highway 99 with a modern 8-lane tunnel. This will break down a key lower mainland trade bottleneck to enable British Columbia and Canada to export more of what we produced faster, while cutting travel times for people and goods across Greater Vancouver and traffic bound for BC ferries to Vancouver Island. And the Port of Prince Rupert and the Port of Stewart, Canada will work with port authorities and First Nations to maximize the potential of these ports to serve as vital trade corridors for Canadian goods and services, including critical minerals. There's a couple of other things here, but given that we are close to the start time, what the announcement is supposed to be, I am going to go look for that source that we can use for the live stream. There we go, CBC. Yeah, this is the type of thing I think for which they will have simultaneous interpretation if something is said in French, and something likely will be said in French, at least by Mr. here on this. So hopefully we'll have the proper simultaneous interpretation at that time. So I've got it lined up here. So let's be certain and already put the screen up so that we can see it when it starts. That's myself. That's the problem. Let's try that one more time. There we go. That's the right one. Okie dokie. And let's see who goes. Yeah, okay, we can do that. And then hopefully when it starts, I can go in and I can maximize it. There, I see, like that. See our friend Bill Kelly here. And then well, what do you know? That's the thumbnail for the show that's on right now that we're doing right there. How's that for a little bit of a meta moment? Okay. So given that we have a little bit of time left, let's go back to that announcement and I can bring you a little more. It says that to further accelerate home building in British Columbia, the Government of Canada has introduced legislation that would provide a one-time transfer of $284 million to British Columbia to reduce barriers to new construction. And then it talks about, yes, the condo conversion thing, and it talks about investing in trades education as well. All right, so those were big announcements, and Premier Eby was quite enthusiastic about them when having to comment about them in the question and answer period that followed. There were some questions also about the condo issue that came up. They were handled very well in that case, so not much additional controversy coming from that. The initial announcement probably wasn't as good as it could have been, let's put it that way, and the Prime Minister has admitted to that specifically in the course of all of this. But yeah, when you are hearing the details about it, it's not nowhere near as bad as the Conservatives are trying to make it out to be, and they're doing a whole bunch of shenanigans. But like I said, we'll get that on. That's a whole other show here. So all of this happened, and then at some point this afternoon, around 4:30 our time here in Ontario, Danielle Smith had another press conference where she was making a big announcement, and that announcement is that had something to do with Pembina, and it looks like it has to do with data centers, because it seems that there is some type of bring your own electricity policy in terms of Alberta for data centers. So because data centers are energy hogs, and if you're going to want to do that, then you probably have to build your own source and are be willing to pay that, is the impression that I'm getting here. One of the things is that Alberta has some of the highest energy costs in the world, and because most of everything is fueled with natural gas. So, according to Lauren Krugel of the Canadian Press, it says that Pembina Pipeline Corporation and two partners have given the go ahead to the Green Light Electricity Center, a natural gas plant serving a data center customer. Hold on, I'll try and see if there's a way that I can see things at the same time. Probably not. Okay, so I'll just have to come back frequently to make sure that the event hasn't started while I'm reading this article here to you. Pembina, Morgan Stanley Infrastructure Partners, and Kineticor Asset Management expect the cost of the project to come in at $4.6 billion. The 932 megawatt plant would be built in Sturgeon County, part of Alberta's industrial heartland, region north of Edmonton, with startup targeted for the second half of 2030. The companies have permits that would allow them to double the capacity down the line. Data centers house the computer hardware required to power various tech applications, and their scale has ballooned with the boom in artificial intelligence and cloud computing. The province and companies did not identify the data center customer they're serving. Just take a look to make sure things haven't started yet. Okay. Alberta has been actively trying to court the so-called hyperscale developers like Meta and Google to set up shop in the province, but its electricity grid currently does not have enough capacity to accommodate several such projects. So Alberta is prioritizing projects that build or contract with their own power generation. Quote, the Greenlight Electricity Center serves as a perfect example of this approach, Premier Danielle Smith said at a news conference Thursday. By having data centers bring their own generation and pay for related power infrastructure, this framework ensures that projects like this one will actually reduce transmission costs on Alberta's utility bills. Such an investment would not have been possible without a sweeping energy accord signed in November between Ottawa and Alberta, Smith said. Among other things, the two governments agreed to suspend federal clean electricity regulations, which Alberta had contended would drive up costs and undermine reliability of a grid largely dependent on natural gas. Quote, the agreement will allow Alberta to increase oil and gas production, secure more energy projects, and attract billions of dollars in investment that will grow and diversify our economy for years to come. Now, in that press conference that followed, Danielle Smith explained that one of the difficulties that Alberta is having is that they made the big jump from coal to LNG, a higher polluting fossil fuel, to a lesser polluting fossil fuel that they had in abundance, and that transition was relatively expected and expensive, and then to ask them to make a whole new transition again this close after the following one is not on. I do not know how true that is. I mean, certain elements of that are clearly true, that there was a transition away from coal and all that type of stuff. But what that means for the books and all that kind of stuff, I don't know how much that is. But it is something that sounds reasonable and plausible, explained that way to me. I would be more inclined to believe it if it was not Danielle Smith saying it, because Danielle Smith does tend to lie. But clearly, yes, there is true that there was that type of transition that happened. And this is, yes, two transitions in a short period of time, which can indeed be rather expensive. All that is very fair as a comment. However, in this case, or maybe not so much however, but also in this case, we have the reality that Danielle Smith is trying to protect the oil and gas industry in some way. And what I'm seeing happening here is the killing of the renewable sector, thus making oil and gas the only choice, really, to power these AI centers, and then wanting to bring them in even though they don't have the energy to do it, which means that they have to build their own energy. And turns out that the energy that they are going to be using is totally Alberta gas. They want to pursue AI data centers and fuel them, their high electricity demands, with Alberta gas. So it's almost like Danielle Smith was trying to buy enough time and to move all the pieces to create a situation where she can bring in a customer for the gas so that they don't have to pump less of it to replace whatever it is on the grid that is going to be eventually supplied by greener or lower carbon emitting forms, like more nuclear in Alberta, which Alberta has resisted for a while. But also, if there are going to be more interties with the more global system, and there's going to be more clean power coming from British Columbia, and there's going to be more hydropower come from Manitoba, and that type of stuff. That too, when Alberta says, well, we know we need to pump more gas into it because we need more baseload power, that argument is going to become less and less relevant. But right now, there doesn't seem to be much of way to get Alberta to fuel itself in a different way. But at some point, Alberta is going to want to reduce how much it costs to do a business in Alberta, where the rate of electricity is concerned. At some point, that is going to matter, especially if Alberta will want to diversify its economy eventually. So this does set them up to be able to do that if they have more interties and they start bringing in more nuclear down the road. But Danielle, it looks like, starting to look like the plan all along was to make it such that rather than producing less LNG overall, that she could still keep on pumping the same amount and more, but just needing a new client for it. That if she creates a situation where she's bringing in data centers and the only way they can fuel themselves is with LNG, that's a very interesting way to create a whole new pool of demand. And given how much energy they do demand, it's a good way to switch people off quickly. It doesn't end up polluting less in the end overall, though. If that's what's happening. But when I saw that today, it was like, so maybe that's what you were up to. So yes, that would not have been possible without the suspension of the clean energy regulations. So, again, sort of first take, maybe I will learn more that will change my opinion or my view on this, but first take, based on the little that we know now, it would indeed seem that the price that we are somewhat paying is not only the pipeline to the West Coast, but the possibility of a lot of data centers in Alberta fueled first, at least, by natural gas, and hopefully by other things, should more nuclear or interties bring more cleaner energy from other provinces into Alberta that it could use as part of its baseload. So it's almost, it really feels like dragging Alberta kicking and screaming into the greener age, while it does everything to try to keep up shoring an industry that needs to adapt a little more quickly than it has been. The upside is that the new infrastructure that is being built, the proportion of the new energy being planned for that is not conventional than conventional is significantly higher. And it does mean that when we have the certain infrastructure, like, for example, the nuclear stuff, which is rather expensive, those last, right, 80 to 100 years. So eventually you get there, right? It's sort of when people started converting from coal to gas, and then Donald Trump kept on trying to say, well, let's try to bring back coal. It's like, well, we already spent the billions required to convert. We're not going to convert back just because, the administration in this 4-year period is going to make coal more attractive. That ship has sailed now. We've already invested too much. So if we can get to that sort of tipping point away from the fossil fuels, that's probably our best hope to making the change that we need to make. And then the question for Alberta is, in Saskatchewan, is how quickly can we make that happen? So it seems a little bit like, okay, we've been trying to do it this way. You won't let us do it this way. Okay, so let's take a few steps back. Let's give you a couple of things that you want. Like that's been in condition for some of the things that you want. We need to bring in a couple of things that we want. And then, we get a toehold in that. And over time, as we're putting in place more of the things that we all want all around you, at some point, you know, you have to make the change because there's just nothing, not much, there's not much more of a case for doing it the old way. And, like I said, dragging and kicking and screaming, but eventually it will get done. And it's more likely to get done eventually by doing it this way than doing it the way that we were trying to do it with just this big sort of, edict or plan that came from on top and say, now go out and make it happen. Um, I don't know. Like I said, it's a different approach. I can see how it could work, right? It's just letting time and market forces do their thing while just giving them, not trying to win the whole battle in one shot, but trying to put in enough things in place that make it such that when those things click in, the momentum of that then just accelerates on its own. And at one point, it just, that snowball effect makes it such that, you know, uh, you can still fight for the old way, but that time is really, really over and it really is not coming back. And for a lot of us, we're already there, but right, there's still enough of a business case out there for people who have invested a lot over a long time to keep pushing in that direction. So, I mean, it's going to be hard to loosen the grip, but again, it's almost like incrementalism that was used to build the case for this is being used to set up the strategic pieces that need to be in play so that eventually we can move away from this, or that the cry from the what will happen to all of us won't be the determining factor. It's that we will just we need to get with it. We need to get with the times. So, but yeah, there's going to be a certain amount of criticism, no doubt, with regard to the loosening of the Alberta of the electricity regulations here with regard to this. If the objective we find out is so that Alberta can build a whole bunch of data centers that are fueled by LNG. Um, that one will be a little more difficult to sell. Honestly, it would be. So yeah. So all of these little media literacy here is we're going to be getting a lot of hot takes after this. As you know, I am not a oil industry energy expert, all that type of stuff. So whatever first take I have is bound to be somewhat incomplete, just by virtue of the fact that it is first take, but also limited expertise in this domain. But with regard to communications, the one thing that I do know is, like I said, you you could look at the announcements in the north as being one element of it, but they're not necessarily tied to this. But the overall strategy of getting some projects done and moving, that's sort of the larger one. When the conservatives say, we elected this government to do one thing, get a deal with the United States. No, we elected it to do one thing, which was try to get the best deal we can get out of the United States while doing all that we can as quickly as we can without, you know, provoking people too much. But as quickly as we can to be able to reduce our exposure to a single point of failure because we see where the ship is going and that is not good. We want to be dragged down as little as possible. So, and that's a big thing, right? Doubling our our exports by, I think it is 2035, our non-US exports by 2035, for example, which is one of the goals. Well, we started with 26% of our exports going to non-US destinations. So that brings us to 52 if we manage to do that successfully. We still have 40, by 2035, we'll still have 48% of our economy dealing with the United States if we achieve that goal. And when a 48%, somebody with whom you have 48% of your business still decides to go rogue, that still has a major impact on your economy, right? It's not we're not going to be decoupled or fully independent by that time. And still by 2035, there's a lot that can happen between then and now to, take us out at the kneecaps along the way while we try to do that. So, but we have to be realistic as well, right? That is an ambitious goal, but it still leaves us with 48% of our trade going to the United States and still leaves them with a massive amount of influence over us, right? That's just it's just numbers, it's just math, right? So we have to the people that are taking the position that if we say elbows up and we're not constantly shoving our elbows in people's faces, they're not understanding the math here, right? We must stand up for ourselves and we must make some strategic moves and we must make them in a strategic way and we must make them in such a way that doesn't stoke too much fear or too much if we can't have you, nobody else can. Abuser talk type dynamics with our neighbor to the south. But we got to do it. Like we really, really, really got to do it. Yeah. Yes. Don't know why they are starting late. Uh, because I'm getting the impression that this was an announcement that Danielle Smith was going to make herself. And then somewhere along the way, the prime minister indicated that he might want to make might be a good idea to make this announcement together, and wanting to shore up the BC flank of this, right? Resolving the tanker issue before this announcement. So I have a feeling that based on um, his negotiations with the Premier of British Columbia. It seems that his plane was late. I don't know if there was a weather thing or that type of stuff, but that's why it was pushed to 6 p.m. Well, 6 p.m. their time today. Um, there might be some debrief between um, the government of Canada and the government of Alberta based on what happened today in British Columbia, and they might be needing a little bit of additional time. There might be some things in there that Danielle Smith is not too happy about, right? Maybe before the announcement in BC today, Danielle Smith wasn't necessarily 100% on giving up on her plan to have it go through the north. Maybe she already had, because in one way it would be kind of a bit reckless to just announce that right beforehand, considering the personality that she is. She is the type of person that would choose to blow this all up. So I will assume in this case that this is something that she knew of, but maybe did not expect it to be announced prior to her announcing it, or something of the sort. Or there could have been any other thing like this that maybe got her dander up, or on what she needs to make clear to her. Because again, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe she will surprise us and tell us that she has a proponent, but I have a feeling that, given all the rhetoric we've been hearing, I remember, I believe it was Rebecca Schultz, if I'm not mistaken, was the Minister of the Environment, who was on Power and Politics one day talking about all of a sudden that there would need to be some type of government de-risking or subsidies or something. And I believed that the whole point of this, from Danielle Smith's perspective, is that if the government had to fund it, then it was yet another failure. And so we're looking at perhaps a possibility where the government of Alberta chooses to be the main proponent, and then maybe with one or two some type of a private sector associations of some kind, but somewhat minor, and then claiming that they need to do this for this stage of the process, and they'll put again much more, a little bit more money behind it, and be working to find the proponent. Now that we are clear on the moratorium being respected, now that we're clear, then we can find out. But wondering if there's going to be some more wriggling out of the pathways thing. Um, because as you know, with the MOU, as soon as it was the ink on that was barely even dry, the government of Alberta went out and to change something having to do with carbon credit structure to make it such that achieving the goals was not going to be very possible. And then they did something else to the methane emissions regulations that again went against the spirit of the MOU. And then we heard the people from Pathways starting talking about the project was too big and we had to make it smaller. And then recently we've been hearing talking again like it's just too expensive and we don't think we can do it. So these are all these. It's just they signed an agreement and they're going back on it and going back on it and going back on it and going back on it. And so, like I said, maybe they went back on so many things that the prime minister said, well, fine. I guess if you're going back on all of that, then the moratorium, that's going down. I can see that type of scenario happening. Um, but it does look like we are going to be, it would be nice to have somebody that has expertise in both, what was the original memorandum of understanding and what's happening now and what's the spread. Because I have a feeling that what we're getting ultimately is way different than what Alberta agreed to. And I think that the prime minister, again, being a risk manager, probably wouldn't be too keen on sharing what it is he's had to let go of in order to get this to happen. I mean, if his priority is getting the project done, how far is he willing to go? Mm, But there better be some, like I said, the moratorium is a big win. It's a huge win. It's a huge concession. But it will be interesting to see what other types of things come along because we've heard the no pathways, no project thing many times now. And, it would be uh, again, it would be problematic if that had to be reduced to even more somehow. So I'm thinking that there might be some bending on what is going to be considered uh, an acceptable proponent in order to keep this project somewhat alive. And here is the real politic thing. The prime minister, in one case, kind of has his hands tied because of that October referendum, right? If you came in at this point and said no, no deal, right? That would change things on the ground. So there's no interest in that. So this is um, probably if we assume that Danielle Smith is not necessarily being of good faith, this is a bit of a game of chicken, right? How much is the prime minister willing to concede on in order to keep this thing not be um, a referendum topic? And if it is one that's on his side, on Canada's side, we do have an agreement, and then other things can be decided later. Let's say. Uh, and for Danielle Smith would be how much can she get away with prior to that, because once the referendum does take place and if she does lose it, um, then there's much fewer opportunities for her to continue along with this strategy and be as effective as she has been. So she's got to get as much done as possible in this particular period. So, but yes, it's probably going to look like the prime minister made a lot of big concessions to Alberta here. I have a feeling. That said, there one cannot undervalue, one cannot underestimate the value of getting that moratorium, if that is indeed the case, and having it respected and resolving that with finality. Because that's just, again, when you add all of the deals that the province of British Columbia would have had to pretty much sacrifice by going back on that commitment. Um, the math imposes itself. The decision was a clear one on the part of the government. Again, right, the prime minister, again being a pragmatist, but somebody who can do math, was that was probably a price that was going to be too high to pay. So again, a lot of these things are trade-offs, right? Sometimes you're looking at two not ideal situations, but you have to think, if you're playing the long game, which is the one that is going to give you the best chance to move forward and make some gains overall, even if it means you taking a step back at this particular moment. So again, hopefully we will get more information. This is rather late indeed now. We are at least half an hour late, which is very interesting. All right, let's go to the chat since we are waiting here and see what we've got, since I've been yammering on and on and on. So let's see what we have. Oh, Uncover, I'm sorry that you are not feeling well. Migraines, indeed, still suck. They will probably forever suck. Let's see what else we have here. We have Kit, Linda, and Elaine with us. Hello to you. Kit Uncover bringing us some breaking news here. Appeals court allows Trump to keep removing national park signs and exhibits deemed negative and woke. Well, that's not great. We have the Breeds with us saying hello. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us. Asking what time is the announcement, or did you miss it? The announcement was supposed to be at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 6 p.m. our time. It was supposed to be earlier today, actually. And yes, it is delayed. I do not know what the delay is. I could probably go on the socials and take a look for that, but I decided to come to see what was in the chat instead. There we go. Let's see, what else do we have here? Kit Toronto Dan is with us. Hello. Nice to see you, good sir. Thank you for joining us. Hope everything is going well for you on the campaign trail. Who else do we have? Kit Tabby G with us. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Let's see, who else do we have here? Nope. Kit Linda letting us know her thoughts about Ambassador Doucheface. Hoekstra is an idiot. It seemed like he was saying that because the bridge will recover costs through tolls, it meant that the Canadians didn't really pay for it. Oh, really? Let's see. This is in response to Kit Uncover saying Canada paying to construct Gordie Howe Bridge is a big myth, according to Ambassador Pete Hoekstra. Yeah. Okay. He really didn't take that interview with Vashti well, did he? Oh, my word. Kit Uncover here continues. The opening of the Gordie Howe Bridge is stalled because the U.S. wants to review the impact of construction costs and delays on revenue sharing, according to the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. Hoekstra said that Canada footing the bill for the bridge is the big myth that is out there. I think that it's important that people realize this, okay, because I hear it all the time. What does America have to do with this? We paid for the bridge. It's our bridge. Just open it. Indeed. Here, another news item that Canada aims to announce 10 countries backing the Global Defense Bank at a NATO summit. So that's going to be interesting. Kit Linda saying Alberta better have a private investor for that pipeline. Kit Jolene, hey, nice to see you. As a BCer, I'm happy to hear that the tanker ban stays. Hello, damn fam. There we go. What else? What do we have here? Kit Tabby G mentioning here, guess that's an explanation of why the orange clown was once again whining about NATO today. And we have Kit Femboy Aliens 789. Ah, you might win the prize for the most fun handle. Why do you think Alberta has been so cagey on actually holding the terms of the MOU they negotiated? Yeah, exactly. Because they needed to buy time. Well, if my hypothesis is correct, of course. But yes. Let's see. We have Kit Saucy with us saying good evening. Good evening to you as well. Kit Jolene adding here. The best part of the news conference with EB and Carney was when EB was explaining the condo. Carney's reaction was great. Yes, yes, because Premier EB talked about buying things at liquidation prices. Because you have all the conservatives saying, well, they're going to buy it at market price. And say, well, and they go, well, no, they're going to go buy it at below market price. There's no such thing as below market price. When you buy things at whatever you paid in the market, that's the market price. And it's like, okay, there's a difference between market price and fair market value, right? So yes, the buying at liquidation, you could see Mark Carney going, yeah, that's a good way to put it business-wise. I'm glad you mentioned that, Kid Jolene. Let's see here. Uh, you're not late at all, Kid Saucy. You're not late at all. Kid Linda. Yeah, Evie was better at explaining it, right? Exactly. Exactly. Let's see here. What else do we have with us? Kid Dale is with us. Hey, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. There we go. Kit Saucy. Yeah, I did see that. Mark Burry is comparing Carney to Harper, saying he's all talk and abandoning climate change reduction will give NDP more seats. This pipeline is getting people worked up on all sides of the sphere. Yeah, it is. Just like the previous one did. The Prime Minister lost a lot of capital on it. This Prime Minister will lose a lot of capital on it. There's no doubt. The question here is whether or not, as he loses that capital, right, because the NDP lost both to the Conservatives and Liberals. Right now, it seems to be affecting Conservatives more than Liberals, but eventually, at some point, if this movement grows, yes, it's going to affect Liberals as well. And the gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals will start to narrow again because there'll be more three-way races, right? And that whole thing where the Conservatives do well if the NDP do well will start to become a factor again because that was sort of eliminated from the past election. Given how much the bottom fell out of the NDP at that time. Let's see what else do we have here in the chat from you, Kits and Cubs. Let's see here. All right, still going down here. Kit Linda M. Kit Linda asks, when Alberta's electricity prices go through the roof or when they start getting brownouts because of the data centers, maybe they'll wake up. Yeah. Right now, it seems that some of the terms of these agreements is that with the power that they bring with them generates a little bit more than what they need. So some more of it can go into the system and they're selling it as an opportunity to actually lower the cost for Albertans. Now, if that actually is the case, yes, that would work. But again, with Danielle Smith, I just only believe it when it lasts. Kitletta goes, unless the feds introduce a tax credit for data centers that use renewable energy to power themselves. Yes, that could be something that comes down the pike, which could then encourage Alberta to make a bigger jump at that point. Let's see here. Can uncover Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is proposing the Defence Security and Resilience Bank DSRB as part of his call this year for an alliance of middle powers to combat what he sees as the fracturing of the traditional US-led world order. Indeed. And that was something as well. When you saw the Conservatives or you heard the Conservatives a bit last week getting all apoplectic that, oh my God, how could Donald Trump and Mark Carney have a phone call together and Mark Carney not press on Kuzma, because it was pressing on stuff having to do with the NATO meeting, which was high level. international defense and security. And during a telephone call like that, you don't go, hey, by the way, while I got you on the line about our trade deal between our two countries, when you're there to discuss international defense, you're there to discuss international defense. One topic, one call. There'll be other times to discuss Kuzma, but that's definitely not the opportunity to bring it up. So thank you for mentioning that, Kid Uncover, because that was a piece of news and a detail that I picked up that I hadn't mentioned on the show yet. Let's see, what else do we have here? Kid Uncover. Breaking: protester sets himself on fire outside United Nations headquarters in New York. Oh my word. Gee. Kid Sassy goes, ooh, I wish people wouldn't do that. It's not going to help and traumatize random people who have nothing to do with the issue. Kid Jolene here. I'm getting the impression that Carney's giving enough rope to Smith that she will hang herself. That's been my hypothesis right from the first MOU when I saw the way that it was structured. It seemed to, okay, sure, girl. I'll agree on giving your pipeline. Sure, I'll take away those 9 bad laws. Oh, here we go. Okay, just bring this up for you. Turn the volume up. We'll be a couple seconds behind everybody.
The time, sorry to be a bit late. I know there is a lot on in Calgary.
Hold on.
The time, sorry to be a bit late. I know there is a lot on in Calgary. Stampede. Some of us are better dressed than others. I was sorry, by the way. Let me start by just with a quick apologies. The weather. Biblical weather last night in Ottawa meant that I couldn't make it to Edmonton, couldn't make it to Mill Woods for Canada Day, to celebrate Canada Day, but I am thrilled to be here in Calgary today to celebrate Canada Strong Day. 3 weeks ago, Premier and I had a discussion after this, immediately after, but 3 weeks ago in France, the G7 leaders called on Canada to provide the reliable energy that the world needs to realize our full potential as an energy superpower. This morning I was in BC, I was in Vancouver with Premier Eby. We announced a landmark agreement that does a number of things, seizes opportunity through major energy projects, new trade corridors, critical minerals developments, projects that will help move Canadian energy to new markets, new partners around the world. Cet après-midi, je me suis entretenu avec le président Marcos des Philippines, un pays de 120 millions d'habitants.
So this afternoon, I had a conversation with President Marcos of the Philippines, a country of about 120 million inhabitants.
L'un des marchés émergents les plus florissants dans le monde.
One of the emerging markets that is the most flourishing in the world.
Et nous sommes sur le point de conclure 2 accords importants qui augmenteront près de 200% nos échanges commerciaux bilatéraux.
And we're on the verge of signing 2 agreements that will increase our bilateral exchanges by about 200%.
D'ici 2035 et nous
between now and 2035.
avons eu une discussion très complexe, très fondamentale sur les occasions d'Alberta énergie.
And we've had a conversation about the economic opportunities that could be met by Alberta energy.
Canadien. Now,
and Canadian
evening,
energy.
I'm very pleased to join Premier Smith here in Calgary to announce new measures that will unlock Alberta's energy for the world. These measures will build the strength of our entire country. They will take control of our future. They will bolster our sovereignty. Today's announcements, and this is a lowball figure. You don't normally get lowball figures from politicians. This is a lowball figure. Canadians' announcements will catalyze well over $200 billion in direct investments in Canada, create over 175,000 new jobs across the country, and we are just getting started. These benefits will be shared widely, including with Indigenous peoples as full partners, and they will create resources for the social programs on which Canadians rely. This is cooperative federalism at work. in collaboration we expect. They expect it on principle, and they expect it because it's required for Canada to prosper in a rapidly changing world. Parce que c'est la bonne réponse à une crise énergétique sur trois niveaux: la vulnérabilité, la sécurité et le climat. Nos alliés le reconnaissent et les Canadiens le savent. You asked for it, we promised it, now we are delivering. Because when we work together, Canada controls its future. This is a new approach that helps us reach our full potential, one that builds in partnership, the federal government, Alberta, British Columbia, partnership with territories, partnership with Indigenous peoples, partnership with the private sector. Indigenous peoples full partners in development, operating, and equity ownership. We've agreed, or at least I think that's what's in the submission that I may get momentarily, that the best route for a new pipeline is one that goes through one that already exists, south through the Trans Mountain Corridor to our Pacific coast, the gateway to the world's fastest growing markets. We've already agreed to reform carbon markets so they promote real emissions. We've already agreed to substantial methane reductions and to new measures, new incentives and reforms so that power markets can grow sustainably and affordably, and this being Alberta, significantly. We will maintain, the federal government will maintain the tanker ban to protect Canada's coastlines and precious habitats, and consistent with the MOU as a prerequisite for the pipeline, the Government of Canada, the Government of Alberta, and the Oil Sands Alliance, the 5 companies in the Oil Sands Alliance, have now agreed on the terms to launch the Pathways Project, the world's largest carbon capture and utilization and storage project, which together with other emission reduction commitments in the agreement will achieve 16 million tons of emissions reductions per year, or the equivalent of taking 90% of the cars in Alberta off the road. Critically, what we've agreed is that the time for action is now. We will refer a submission that I may receive, Alberta's West Coast Pipeline Project proposal immediately to the Major Projects Office. Consultations will begin immediately with Indigenous communities, relevant provinces, and territories to determine listing under the Building Canada Act by October 1st, as per our agreement. Cet accord est bien plus qu'une entente entre 2 gouvernements. Il donne aux entreprises la certitude dont elles ont besoin pour investir et bâtir. This is more than just an accord. It's also an approach that gives certainty to our businesses to build. Canada and Alberta will be equal partners in this project. As I said, meaningful ownership stakes available for Indigenous communities. We'll also benefit from Indigenous contracting and employment alongside funding to strengthen that capacity. The Trans Mountain Corporation will plan and construct the pipeline. They will work closely with Pembina Pipeline Corporation, who will bring its private sector expertise, its capital discipline to the construction and operation of the pipeline. And I'd like to thank the CEO, Scott Burrows, for his leadership and his presence. We are all living through a moment of unprecedented global volatility. Our role as government is to be a catalyst. Part of being a catalyst is to bring greater certainty, reduce risks facing private capital so there's more opportunity and more energy when shovels hit the ground. Ensemble, l'oléoduc et Pathways vont créer plus de 100 000 nouveaux emplois à haut salaire en Alberta, en Colombie-Britannique et, plus que ça, à travers le pays. Des emplois pour des travailleurs qualifiés, des ingénieurs et des techniciens canadiens. De vraies opportunités pour les entreprises, des contracteurs et des travailleurs autochtones. Now, we've started as we mean to go on. We will continue to work together, Albertans, British Columbians, with industry and Indigenous partners at one table instead of many, to deliver. The head of the IEA said a few weeks ago, he repeated it I think a couple days ago, that Canada has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. An opportunity that will determine our future. An opportunity that will deliver prosperity that will spread across our country. Canada, Alberta, has what the world wants. Canada, Alberta, is a trusted, reliable partner in a world that's anything but. And the initiatives we're announcing today will build a stronger, more resilient, more sustainable Canada. A Canada that's worth fighting for because we are stronger together. And as today demonstrates, we are building Canada strong for all. Thank you very much. And it's now my pleasure to give you the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith. Dan?
Well, thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you all for joining us today, along with my ministers, Brian Jean for Energy and Critical Minerals, as well as Rajan Sani, who is our Minister for Indigenous Relations and is going to be very busy over the coming months. I would also like to thank Trans Am Piping for hosting us. And today marks an important step forward for Alberta and for Canada. Beneath our feet here in Alberta, we stand on oil reserves valued at more than $9 trillion. This resource wealth presents our nation with boundless opportunities. Developing these resources would equate to hundreds of billions of dollars in government revenue that could be used to support core social programs like healthcare and education, bolster Canada's national security commitments under NATO, and unlock economic prosperity for Indigenous peoples. It would enable governments across the country to invest in the priorities that matter most while creating hundreds of thousands of jobs and driving unprecedented economic growth across the entire country. This is transformational wealth, an opportunity neither Canada nor Alberta can afford to leave unrealized, which is why I'm happy to stand here today and say that Alberta's government has formally filed our West Coast oil pipeline submission to the Federal Major Projects Office for Project of National Interest listing under the Building Canada Act. I'm also pleased to announce Alberta's government is entering into a partnership with Trans Mountain Corporation and Pembina Pipeline. Yes, Scott, this is the second time you've been with me today. I was surprised we didn't get any questions on this one this morning at the earlier one. And nice to see you as well, Kevin. Along with the federal government to execute this vital nation-building project.
Yep.
This submission is the result of months of intensive work, bringing together world-class technical expertise, engineering analysis, economic modeling, and early engagement with Indigenous communities and partners. After studying both northern and southern route options, Alberta selected a southern route from Bruderheim, Alberta, to a deep-water VLCC-capable port terminal on BC's southwest coast. With the help of our technical advisory group made up of industry experts, we determined that this route offers the fastest, most cost-effective path to expanding Canada's energy exports.
Remove what I'm listening to.
Following the existing Trans Mountain pipeline corridor, this project builds on existing infrastructure. It reflects feedback from Indigenous groups and the government of British Columbia, reduces regulatory barriers, given it would not be subject to the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act, and gets Canada's most valuable natural resource to global markets faster. The proposal also includes an equity ownership partnership and opportunity for Indigenous communities, and more details on this will be shared in the coming months ahead. There is no doubt whatsoever that this pipeline is a project of national interest, one that will help connect Alberta oil to global markets and strengthen our country's economic future for decades. The West Coast oil pipeline will transport more than 1 million barrels of oil per day to Canada's West Coast and strengthen access to growing Asian markets, helping to meet Alberta's goal to double oil production to 8 million barrels per day over the next 10 to 15 years. This project will be built safely and efficiently through an unprecedented public-private partnership between both the Alberta and federal governments with Pembina Pipelines, along with First Nations. And make no mistake, in addition to the substantial new royalties generated from the oil needed to fill this pipe, oil pipelines like this are very profitable. The profits from this pipeline will generate billions in revenues over the coming decades for the provincial and federal governments and will enrich Indigenous communities that choose to partner with us. And speaking of oil royalties, Alberta's government is also finalizing another agreement with the federal government and the Oil Sands Alliance to significantly expand oil sands production and advance Pathways, the world's largest carbon capture and storage project. Doubling oil sands production is a big task. Doing so in the most environmentally responsible manner is an even bigger task, but this agreement will allow us to achieve both. Our oil sands partners will have the incentives they need to launch a super cycle of production growth in Canada's most valuable deposit of natural resources, and Pathways will make Alberta bitumen among the lowest emission heavy oil globally. We've certainly come a long way from talk of phasing out Alberta's oil and gas, haven't we? And together these efforts position Canada to deliver energy that the world needs, responsibly and competitively. Obviously, it will take time, and there is much work ahead of all of us, but I say to all people across Alberta and across Canada, we will get the job done. The window of opportunity is open now. Recent global events have made it clear that Canada's safe and reliable sources of oil, gas, critical minerals are vital to the world's economy. As the Prime Minister knows, the recent communiqué from the G7 meetings in France specifically referenced Canada's opportunity to be an energy superpower to support global demand. We must go all in and seize it. Canada cannot lose another decade or more to delay and inaction. We've heard this very clearly from our international partners from Japan, South Korea, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia, as well as from across Europe. The message is consistent. The world is asking Canada to step up and provide a more stable, democratic, and reliable energy supply that countries around the globe are looking for. This is not just another energy project, it's a nation-building project that will unlock wealth and opportunity for millions of people across the country and provide desperately needed energy to millions more across the globe. The West Coast Pipeline, doubling oil sands production growth, and the Pathways project together will define Alberta's and Canada's economic future. You know, let's work together and build this pipeline. Thank you, and we'll be happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci à vous deux. We'll now turn to questions. Nous allons maintenant commencer les questions. We'll take 10 minutes of questions, 10 minutes de questions. First question, Mickey.
Maybe to both of you, but what guarantees, if any, have been made to Pembina regarding this being a viable investment by both governments?
Well, I would say that one of the things that we knew we had to do in starting off down this pathway was to de-risk the project. There are many, many pipeline projects that got underway, and for one reason or another, got stalled out and abandoned the regulatory process after spending either hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. That was the environment we found ourselves in. So I would say that having both the federal government and the provincial government at the table as partners with Pembina, they give us the certainty that it is a financially viable project from a private sector perspective, and we give them the certainty that because we're partnering with them, that it's going to get built in a timely way. Did you want to comment, Prime Minister?
Well, the first thing, I agree with everything, obviously, the Premier just said. There's some synergies from the fact of having TMC as a partner in an existing route. But there's what Pembina is bringing is expertise, capital discipline. I mean, they're renowned for their capital discipline, operating expertise and discipline, and that enriches it. But decisions will be made by all partners as it moves forward, as this process moves forward. It's financially viable, it's attractive, it unlocks enormous value for the country and value for the equity holders, which will include both our governments, federal government through TMX or TMC, as well as Indigenous partners.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Yeah, so I guess since it's a like public-private partnership for both, and if Prime Minister Carney could also answer in French would be nice. Yeah, like what portion will come out of Albertan or Canadian taxpayers' pocket?
I mean, that remains to be negotiated, and that'll be one of the things that we take away. We wanted to get the high-level agreement of the partnership, and of course, it'll be the federal government, the provincial government, Indigenous stake, as well as Pembina, so it'll be negotiated over time. But what I would say is that when you look at some of the recent projections that were done by ATB about what 1.5 million barrels of additional oil sands production would do for our country, this would be 1 million barrels. They talked about $30 billion. This would be $20 billion per year, every year, for as long as the pipeline operates. And so those will be the kind of revenue figures that we're looking at. And then the ownership stakes will be negotiated on that basis once we look at finalize the terminal point, finalize the route, finalize the costs.
Et peut-être ce serait plus utile de répondre seulement en français. C'est pas une question d'une dépense fédérale, ce sera un investissement. Un investissement du gouvernement du Canada, fait par la coopération TMC, premier point. Deuxièmement, il faut reconnaître que maintenant, l'investissement de TMX qui existe, l'oléoduc qui existe, c'est comme Madame la Première ministre vient d'indiquer, c'est très rentable. C'est très rentable pour tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes. Et ce sera une...
So right now the Prime Minister is saying that we have to understand that when it comes to the TMX project that we just built at the current moment, it is very, very profitable.
Une autre oléoduc qui sera rentable. Alors, pas une dépense, c'est un investissement pour le bénéfice de tous les Canadiens et les Canadiens.
So he's saying that any money that the government is putting into it is not an expense, but it's an investment that will bring back a lot to Canadians, just as was the case with the first pipeline.
Avant les rendements, effectivement, les rendements d'une augmentation de la production de produits.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Hi. Have any producers committed firmly to utilizing the potential pipeline through a sort of preliminary open season process? And if so, who and how much?
One of the conversations we were having with the Pathways group of companies, and remember there are only 5 oil sands companies in that in the Oil Sands Alliance, was how we do that dual investment. One, not only the pipeline, but also the investment in the Pathways project to reduce emissions, but also the investment that is going to significantly increase our oil sands production so that we can fill this pipeline and others that are out there being proposed. So that process will come a little bit later when it comes to commitments, but the fact that they were walking this pathway with us to make sure that we had a 3-part agreement, we'll continue our discussions with the Oil Sands Alliance in making sure that we have the right market conditions so that they can expand their production. But that's also one of the additional agreements that will stem from the agreement that we have today.
If I may, I'll just supplement, because there is, as I mentioned in my remarks, there is a MOU, protocol d'accord, with the 5 Pathways Alliance members, which is a tripartite agreement, the 5, Government of Alberta, Government of Canada, which, as the Premier just indicated the commitments to related to pathways, as well as the intention for the expansions consistent with what would be as part of this pipeline, but also it explicitly mentions the TMX expansion. So that's an MOU, as the Premier indicates. As with all these things, we move forward, but that's a very important commitment. And I'll just make one final observation for those who are wondering about the steps in this. We had our original MOU in November, which gave the intents of where we were going to go. That moved to an implementation agreement, a number of commitments that we made as governments. But then there's the private sector, both to come forth, as Pembina has as a partner at this phase of the project, and for the Oil Sands Alliance companies to make the commitments that they're making as part of this MOU. So it moves from the public sphere into the private sphere in this broader partnership. The next phase is through the Major Projects Office and the consultations and partnership with Indigenous partners. Thank you.
Next question. Prochaine question.
Megan Podkins with The Logic. I think for months we'd heard, in some cases from you, Premier, that the benefits to the northern route had better shipping economics. There was there are other kinds of permitting benefits to going on a northbound route. You've settled or agreed on a southbound route. Is there not a concern or a risk here that we're trading a more commercially viable project for a politically palatable one?
I can tell you that we looked at both projects, and in fact, the southern route had key advantages of using an existing pipeline route, existing established relationships with the Indigenous partners and potential partners along that line. as well as the ability to reduce the amount of time to get it to market. And anyone in the private sector will tell you it's those delays that are to be in production and to be earning revenue, which is one of the big factors for consideration. So as we looked at this one and realized that they're fairly comparable when it comes to the amount of dollars that would have to be outlaid, but we'd likely be able to build this one a couple or more years faster. That factored into the decision making. I still think that there are advantages to talking with First Nations in the north about ways that we can expand the use of the Port of Prince Rupert. I know that Minister Sawney has already spoken with dozens and dozens of Indigenous leaders, and I think we've opened up that conversation for us to be able to talk about future partnerships. But when we looked at this one, the time to market, the efficiency of using the existing line, the established Indigenous relationships, it seemed like this made the best sense economically as well.
If I may just supplement on that, agree with the very important aspect of de-risking in time, being clear about, as the Premier just said, time to market. We're also, goes back to what the G7 asked, what we hear from Asian partners, what I heard from the President of the Philippines today. There's an energy security issue today. And so the interest is how we move towards that. And if I could broaden it and then hand to you, sir, is of course Canada's providing a variety of energy solutions, and another form of those energy solutions is LNG coming through Port of Prince Rupert, Kitimat, and I'll just refer to the Coastal First Nations comments today, and the consistency of what we're doing today with a series of energy projects moving forward to provide solutions. Thank you.
We'll have time for one last question. Dernière question.
Jeff Jones, Globe and Mail. So after 7 months, this project will now require government support in terms of equity. Why do you think that it remains too risky for the private sector to run with it by itself?
I would say that we did have a number of projects, and I can elaborate on them. I mean, we did have Northern Gateway that had all of its approvals, and they were then canceled. We did have Keystone XL, who had all of its approvals and were starting to build pipelines across the border, and a presidential permit was canceled. We had Energy East that was $1 billion into a regulatory approval process and couldn't see the way to a finish line, so it was canceled. So we have pipeline companies that have literally spent billions of dollars in recent years on failed regulatory approval processes. That's the environment we're finding ourselves in. And so it does take some work, I think, to make sure that the private sector proponents understand that this is a real process. There's a real commitment on the part of all three parties, myself, as well as the Premier of British Columbia, as well as the Prime Minister, to get this project to the finish line. So what the share of the private sector stake will be, that remains to be seen. Maybe over time, as more and more certainty comes in, maybe we'll be talking with Scott about him wanting to take on a larger and larger share. But we want to make sure that a company knows that we're walking this path with them, so that we can get it to the end. And I won't speak for the Prime Minister, but I did notice that they have already received a over $1 billion dividend payment from the Trans Mountain pipeline. And so it seems to me that once you get through the construction process and you start earning revenue, it is an incredibly lucrative type of infrastructure that will benefit taxpayers. That was our consideration as well, but I'll turn it over to the Prime Minister.
First off, let me thank the Premier for making that point. It is, because it's an important point. And I referenced this earlier in one of the first questions about the profitability of TMX. TMX, de-risked, up and running, now is very profitable. And it's returning real cash to Canadians that is supporting social programs, supporting other things. And this is one of the things we're conscious of in terms of TMX, Sovereign Fund, other aspects, a much bigger answer. But let me make a fundamental point, which is, and I started my comments early in my comments, I said we were lowballing the scale of investment. Part of the reason I was lowballing the scale of investment is I wasn't accounting for all of the upstream investment in oil and gas. So a series of announcements, some of it's It's port infrastructure in BC, which is as much for other commodities. It's for goods exports, enormous opportunity. Other logistics exports, clean energy investments in British Columbia, critical mineral investments beyond. There's a series of investments which we're not counting, which the broader MOU will unlock on interties, on gas turbines, potentially nuclear investment, data center, a series of other things. We are talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of investment. The vast, vast majority of that is going to come directly from the private sector. The measures we're taking are catalytic in order to help unlock all of that. Dawn Farrell's here, and I'm going to finish with this. I want to thank Dawn for her leadership of the Major Projects Office, right out of here of Calgary. And what Dawn does is help to ensure that what the federal government is doing is creating the conditions to unlock that private investment. So there's enormous private investment that's going to come. And as the Premier said at the start, as I said at the start, and I'll finish, and that's for the benefit of all Albertans and all Canadians, including the fact that it will provide resources to government to support our vital social programs, educate our children, and move forward as a country. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. If we could just do the quick photo with the proposal book.
Should we come? Where should we?
Right in front of the podium would be great.
So, assuming that you can hear me there, you've got Minister Olszewski there, Corey Hogan, who's the MP for Calgary Confederation there as well, in the background, from what I can see here. Yeah. And the sound seems to have been muffled out. All right, and now they've cut off all the sound here. So while they are taking pictures and stuff. All right, so that is the announcement. Again, haven't been able to necessarily...
Distinguished guests,
Whoops.
please...
Hold on. That's something else that is going on.
The time, sorry to be a bit late, I know.
Whoops. All right, having a little bit of difficulty here today. Let's see if I can do it this way. There you go. So yeah. Again, not completely familiar or up to date on all the terms, so it's kind of difficult to see the analysis, to give you a hot take analysis on this. But here we will go to CBC that had some all day long sort of commentary on what was going on today. And see if I can bring you a couple of elements that can go along with this. And then maybe we might be able to understand it a little bit more here. So yeah, so about 8 hours ago, what I was talking about Carney and Eby making an announcement ahead of the Alberta pipeline update. And we also learned in that press conference that the Prime Minister did not get to go to Edmonton as planned yesterday for Canada Day due to the weather that we had here, the big cloud burst that I had mentioned that struck around 7:45 to 8:15 p.m. And there was probably, I don't know what time it hit in Ottawa, the system, but yes, that delayed his travel. So his plane wasn't necessarily delayed today, but last night, it would seem. So yes, around 10:15 a.m. Pacific time, that announcement was scheduled. Premier Eby had just returned from a trade trip to China. He had left on Saturday and had cut that trip short because of the progress on the agreement with Ottawa. So obviously some things came together at the very last moment when it comes to this. After that, it said that it had signed a multi-billion-dollar memorandum of understanding with Ottawa over support for the BC resource projects and other priorities. The deal includes a commitment from Ottawa to keep the North Coast oil tanker ban in place, which will make it harder for Alberta to advance any pipeline routes that run to the BC's North Coast. Eby has repeatedly said that lifting the tanker ban would put BC's pristine coastline at risk of an oil spill and would jeopardize First Nations support for other BC resource projects. So that we had reported on already. Of course, the deal includes support for the BC's aging George Massey Tunnel, which they call the bottleneck-prone tunnel and that is part of a critical commuter trade route linking the Metro Vancouver cities of Delta and Richmond. So that is interesting here. BC Transportation Minister Mark Farnworth previously said the cost of the project had increased from the initial $4.1 billion, but did not give a specific new price tag with that. Like I mentioned, BC said that he wouldn't fight a federal pipeline because, well, right, there's no point. They'd already tried that, and that was not going to work at all. The Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative, an alliance of First Nations on BC's North Coast, has long voiced its opposition to a pipeline, saying at the time a memorandum of understanding was signed between Alberta and Ottawa that the nations would use, quote, every tool in their toolbox to keep oil tankers out of their coastal waters. Marilyn Slett, elected chief of the Haltsik Nation and the initiative's president, said the alliance will never allow oil tankers on our coast, and this pipeline project would never happen. Today is a good day, Slett said in a release this morning. Quote, Northwest BC is already home to 1/3 of the major projects announced over the past year, and many of these will significantly increase shipping traffic through the North Coast. Together, we can build durable economic partnerships, invest in the infrastructure needed to ensure safe and reliable shipping, and protect our environment, creating lasting benefits for Canadians and generations to come. The nations would much rather work with Ottawa on projects they feel are nation-building, forward-looking, and built in partnership with Indigenous peoples, she said. And you have Pierre Poilievre of the Conservatives criticizing it, saying that, tankers flow through there all the time. They don't. That's actually not true. To the question of whether or not the deal with Alberta announced today was a quid pro quo, Carney responded by calling the announcement a part of Canada Strong Day, saying this agreement was about capturing BC's potential for the province and the country as a whole. You heard them say that in the press conference. Yesterday was Canada Day. Today is Canada Strong Day. Eby followed up by saying he's proud of what he called a BC project about BC agreements, suggesting that examining the announcement through the lens of an Alberta agreement was a disservice to British Columbia. Says here that leading up to this is Andrew Jeffrey from CBC about 6 hours ago, saying 2 days ago, Carney declined to say whether he had seen a proposal from Alberta, but said he was, quote, very up to speed on the potential pitch. He reiterated that Ottawa's support for a West Coast pipeline is linked to building the Pathways carbon capture and storage project to offset some of the emissions from increased oil production. We didn't hear too much about that or any changes to that part of the agreement in the announcement that just took place. Heather Exner-Pirot, director of the Natural Resources, Energy and Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, said she believes the video, the forward guidance video on energy that the Prime Minister put out just before Canada Day, is an indication that Ottawa is in favor of moving the project forward and delivering on a pipeline, will designate it a nation-building project and assist with financing in some form. All right, and we kind of got that impression from what was stated today. There is some articles then going on about understanding the oil tanker ban and the northern BC's history of pipeline protest, specifically to get some context. Then there are some opinions from Northwest BC that have been included here, and this is Catherine Garrett. She says, I'm a reporter based in Terrace, though I'm from Haida Gwaii. Like Andrew, I remember the biggest news story of my high school and early university years was the opposition to Northern Gateway. Everywhere you looked, there was someone with a no pipeline, no tankers, no problem t-shirt, and flyers and bumper stickers were available at local business. There was also a billboard at the ballpark in Dajing Gids, Haida Gwaii, saying Haida Gwaii versus Enbridge. I've been speaking to locals from all over the region on their thoughts about the pipeline routes proposed by Alberta that would go through northern BC. For Maskinny Bulky Valley MP Taylor Bacharach, a prominent local opponent of Northern Gateway, primarily in his role as mayor of Smithers from 2011 to 2019, says the opposition to oil tankers on the north coast goes back almost 50 years. He said it began in 1978 with the West Coast Oil Ports Inquiry, a federal commission to evaluate the environmental, social, and navigational impacts of a proposed crude oil terminal in Kitimat, and was revived again in 2012 when the Enbridge Joint Review Panel that assessed the potential impacts of Northern Gateway. The results of that opposition have been reflected in federal policy and legislation like the oil tanker ban, he added. It seems like the same lesson has to be learned over and over, Bacharach told me. So there you go. And it seems that maybe not. So there you go, because that was put in there. Again, Podiev, 5 hours ago, could have been 5 years ago, he doesn't change much, said the government should get out of the way of a pipeline. Government isn't out of the way. They're actually clearing the way for it to happen, but you would never notice if you talked about him. And then, of course, says the North Coast tanker ban is ridiculous. I think the North Coast tanker ban is ridiculous. American tankers travel through those same Pacific waters all the time from Alaska to U.S. West Coast. They don't. So why does Mark Carney believe carrying American oil from Alaska to California is safe, but it's not safe for us to send Canadian oil over to Asia through the same passage? He says it takes about 36 hours less time to get to Asia from northern BC as it does from southern BC. Yes, but the goal here, sir, that you're not considering is 36 less hours by going versus the north versus the south versus things not going at all because you insist on going through the north to save 36 hours. The choice is not between a route that will get you there, say, to 36 hours faster and one that will get you there later. The choice is between no route at all and a route that will get you there. So he's not dealing in the same reality as everybody else. And the fact that he does not want to see reality as it is shows that he's just opposing for the sake of opposing, and he's doing it in bad faith. Said here, during his news conference, Podiev said polls show the vast majority of British Columbians support pipelines from Alberta to the Pacific. The fact is that public opinion polling gathered by Angus Reid in late 2025 found that among BC residents, support outweighs opposition, 53 supportive of a pipeline to 37% opposed and 10% unsure. There's also a caveat in the poll worth mentioning. It showed BC is also the province with the highest support for leaving the North Coast tanker ban in place, with 38% in favor of upholding the ban. Breaking down the polling by geography shows opposition to a pipeline increases for residents on Vancouver Island and the North Coast at 44%, although another 48% support the idea. So majority support, not necessarily overwhelming support, and much less support if it went through the North Coast than if it goes through another route. Let's see what else. Let's see. Does Canada need another route? Smith says new alignment with Carney would be good for the world. Let's see here. She says, I think it sounds like we're finally in alignment on that particular issue after 10 years after being at odds. I think it's going to be good for Alberta. It's going to be good for the country. It's going to be good for the world. Frankly, I believe she mentioned something about this in this press conference as well. And that thing, that particular issue, is the federal government developing options for an oil pipeline to the West Coast. So that's about 3 hours before the announcement. It says here, okay, this one's reporting that EB is still opposed to the potential pipeline rather than being okay with it so long as it passes a certain route or meet certain conditions. But here, according to Brock Wilson of CBC, it says EB reiterated his opposition to a potential pipeline out of Alberta just now during an appearance today on CBC's Power and Politics, albeit with slightly softer tone. EB has previously described the proposed pipeline from Alberta as fictional, said at this point he doesn't know if it's fiction, but recognizes how committed both Carney and Smith are to the project. But that doesn't mean he approves. Quote, don't expect me or members of my government caucus to say we like this project, EB said when asked where he stands ahead of Alberta's announcement. He said his priorities now are that the BC is fairly compensated through any new project that the First Nations are able to participate in a meaningful way. EB finished by saying that whatever comes, BC will play its part as part of Team Canada in what was perhaps a nod to the cooperative federalism he highlighted during his announcement with Carney earlier today. All right. They've got some feedback from business leaders that came in a little early before the announcement. Quote, businesses have been saying we want to get projects built, we want to get the economy moving, and this agreement does provide some of that foundation to do that, said Brigitte Anderson, CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Anderson said federal investments in the Port of Vancouver expansion, critical mineral projects, and key clean energy projects solidify BC's role in growing the national economy. Richard Masson, an energy consultant and former CEO for the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, says he believes the plans to expand the Port of Vancouver, coupled with Carney's decision to keep the North Coast tanker ban, point to a southern pipeline route as the best option. Quote, going south follows a corridor where there's already a great deal of knowledge and a lot of infrastructure to work from, he said. So business leaders saying that they're pleased with the province's deal with Ottawa to provide billions of dollars in support for infrastructure and resource projects. Here, a bit of analysis by Justin McElroy on why bridge and tunnel politics helped to make the BC-Ottawa pipeline truce happen. That's something I might present on tomorrow's show because I want to get more information about today's announcement that will give me a little bit in context here. Then, an hour before the thing, Smith confirmed that the announcement will be about the proposed route. And then basically an update that came 39 minutes ago, as was announced here in this press conference. The private proponent or private company required by the Alberta Canada Memorandum of Agreement to permit a pipeline to the West Coast is the Pembina Pipeline Corporation. In a news release published before Smith and Carney spoke, the company said it's entered into a non-binding agreement between the governments of Canada and Alberta, along with the Trans Mountain Corporation, to participate in a proposed nation-building energy infrastructure initiative, with Pembina saying it will contribute expertise. Okay, so you heard in that the Prime Minister state specifically that Pembina was the partner in this phase of the project. So that is probably the concession that we got, is she didn't find a proponent to fund this 100%, which was supposed to be the deal. Now it's looking like there's not going to be that. We had a hint of that specifically when they were talking about the fund to encourage Indigenous participation for them to buy an equity share. That would definitely be taxpayers' dollars going to that. And then we're here about de-risking, which usually means more taxpayers' dollars going to something, or to take on costs that normally would have gone to the corporation instead, right? Or to provide some tax credits or other types of guarantees of the sort that then makes it more financially viable. But originally, I do remember Danielle Smith saying something like, if there had to be any federal dollars or provincial dollars going towards this, this was not going to be the case. We heard it mentioned that it was a public-private partnership and not a private deal. So right now, there's a lot of qualifiers being used, and basically all of this to confirm, where nobody's actually saying it, that Alberta does not have a proponent. But at least to get from the July 1st phase to at least the October something phase, and maybe a little bit beyond that, Pembina is willing to do a couple of things. But here, as it says, providing expertise, which means it is not putting money. So there's a lot of wallpapering going on to mask the fact that there is no actual proponent. They're claiming that there is one, but it really is only for this phase of the project, from what we can tell, to provide expertise, not money. And they are talking about public-private partnership, which is not an entirely private proponent. It's unclear what the financial terms of the company's participation is at this point, and it says in a news release that it has a target of September to sign a definitive agreement. Pembina's existing pipelines include the Syncrude pipeline. The company has said it shall have no at-risk development capital at this stage, which likely means that for the moment it is not risking a substantial amount of money, if any. Okay. Very interesting. Let me see if there is the news release that they have here. Says Pembina Pipeline Corporation, Pembina or the company, henceforth afterwards referred to in the article, today announced that it has entered into a non-binding heads of agreement HOA with the Government of Canada, the Province of Alberta, Trans Mountain Corporation, and Alberta Petroleum and Marketing Commission to participate in a proposed nation-building energy infrastructure initiative intended to strengthen Canada's energy transportation network and expand market access for Canadian crude oil. Pembina will contribute its development and execution expertise to a multi-stakeholder initiative connecting Canadian energy to global markets. Pembina's participation remains subject to satisfaction of certain conditions. Danielle Smith said Pembina and others, and I heard you say in the chat, who are the others? The Trans Mountain Corporation, the Alberta Petroleum and Marketing Commission are probably the other two here. The HOA, that's the heads of agreement, contemplates the development of let's try that again. The HOA contemplates the development of a new approximately 1 million barrel per day crude oil pipeline system connecting Alberta to Canada's west coast and a related export terminal. The proposed pipeline will leverage the existing Trans Mountain pipeline right-of-way, also known as the Southern Route. The project is being advanced as a national priority that brings together the Government of Canada, the Province of Alberta, Indigenous partners, and industry. Under the framework in the HOA, the project would be held through a development company jointly owned by the Government of Canada, the Province of Alberta, and Pembina. So again, the project would be held through a development company jointly owned by the Government of Canada, the Province of Alberta, and Pembina. There is no way that this is a private proponent project. With a working interest to be reserved for Indigenous partners to acquire at commercial operations, Pembina's economic interest through construction will be 10%, with the opportunity for up to an additional 10% once the project enters commercial operation. So again, I'm not an expert on this, but if it is looking like the maximum amount of this project that Pembina is going to put up is 20% of the project, that's very far from a private proponent. Now, well, as the project becomes more real, other private proponents come in and take up a larger percentage. Maybe that happens with these types of projects, but right now, from what I'm understanding, and again, don't take my word for it because this is not my field of expertise, but it's looking like this is saying that 90% of the costs at the moment are going to be taken up by the federal government, and that could possibly be lowered to 80% if Pembina sees that after the 10%, there's an opportunity for them to make more money off that. Then they might take another 10. So we are very far off, if I'm reading this correctly, from what was originally proposed. Pembina would participate as an experienced industry operator able to provide an independent perspective on cost, schedule, and execution, complementing rather than replacing the lead project proponent. Complementing rather than replacing the lead project proponent. There is no lead project proponent from the private sector. This is what this is confirming here. In this capacity, Pembina would bring more than 70 years of safe, disciplined, and cost-effective project development and execution working alongside the experienced team at Trans Mountain Corporation. As part of this, Pembina, through the HOA, is in the early stages of reviewing the development plans and initial capital cost estimates for the project. This due diligence work stream will continue until the signing of definitive agreements, which is targeted for September 2026. Consistent with its long-standing approach to capital allocation, Pembina will evaluate participation in the project through a disciplined and rigorous investment framework. The proposed multi-stakeholder structure is intended to appropriately align risk and responsibility among participants and includes protection for Pembina related to matters such as cost overruns and returns. Pembina has full discretion over any final investment decision for its interest and shall have no at-risk development capital prior to a final investment decision. Pembina will assess the opportunity against defined project milestones throughout the development period and will evaluate its participation in the context of its long-standing prudent capital allocation guardrails and its broader development portfolio. The company intends to provide updates at appropriate milestones as the evaluation of the project progresses. Quote, the project represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to advance nation-building energy infrastructure that strengthens Canada's economy and expands access to global markets for Canadian energy, said Scott Burrows, President and Chief Executive Officer of Pembina. Quote, we are proud to bring our development and execution expertise to a project of this national significance. Our participation will be evaluated through the same disciplined lens we apply to every capital decision. We have approached our involvement in a way that is measured, that preserves our financial flexibility, and that incorporates meaningful protections so that any participation remains consistent with our financial guardrails and creates durable value for our shareholders. So there you have it, kits and cubs, with regard to this. Yeah, quite far off from what the original objective was to be. Let's see what else we have here. 38 minutes ago, reported by Brock Wilson, Carney spoke first at the news conference in Calgary. He said the Trans Mountain Corporation will plan and construct a new West Coast oil pipeline out of Alberta, working closely with the Pembina Pipeline Corporation. He said his government will refer Alberta's West Coast Pipeline project proposal to the Major Projects Office. Carney said his government, the Alberta government, and the Oil Sands Alliance have also agreed on the terms to launch the Pathways Project, a massive carbon capture, utilization, and storage project. He said the agreement will result in 16 million tons of emissions reductions per year. Carney said the announcement will, quote, unlock Alberta's energy for the world, claiming it will create more than $200 billion in new direct investments in Canada and at least 175,000 new jobs across the country. So I'm guessing that the Prime Minister might have gotten what he wanted on Pathways at the end of it all. Not much additional detail in this to what the terms of that agreement are. But hopefully that will be having more news on that coming up. More here from Vincent McDermott saying the proposed West Coast pipeline is going to be a nation-building project that will also meet rising energy demands across Europe and Asia, Smith said. The proposed pipeline will move more than 1 million barrels of oil per day, and double oil sands production to 8 million barrels per day over the next 10 to 15 years. Quote, developing these resources would equate to hundreds of billions of dollars in government revenue that could be used to support core social programs like health and education, bolster Canada's national security commitments under NATO, and unlock economic prosperity for Indigenous people, Smith said. We've certainly come a long way from talk of phasing out Alberta's oil and gas, haven't we? Yeah, she said rather smugly, I remember, in that press conference. So that's basically what we have here. I'm going to take a look to see if there are some hot takes out there from the press, given that they've had a couple of moments now to be able to offer some type of analysis. See, looking at the CBC, if there's anything else. Okay, nothing there. All right, let's take a look where else. Let's take a look at the Globe and Mail. This is from All right, let's see if I can access it because it is beyond paywall. Go. From Emma Graney, Jeffrey Jones, and Stephanie Levitz. Emma Graney is the energy reporter for the Globe and Mail. Jeffrey Jones, the ESG and sustainable finance reporter, and Stephanie Levitz is the senior reporter here. Says the Alberta government will propose a southern route for its new oil pipeline to the west coast, relenting on its insistence that a conduit to the Pacific be routed to BC's northern coast, three government and industry sources say. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has said from the start of the planning that a new 1 million barrel a day pipeline should run to a marine terminal in the northwestern BC. However, several First Nations in the area have voiced a strong opposition to a pipeline in the region. A northern route would also have required changes to the federal tanker ban along that part of BC's coast, which is considered a non-starter by that province's government. That opposition, as well as numerous environmental challenges, prompted the Liberal government of Prime Minister Mark Carney to try to persuade Alberta to change tack and consider building a pipeline that largely follows the right-of-way for the Trans Mountain Pipeline from Edmonton to southern BC. The sources said that's the path Alberta will propose in its submission to Ottawa's Major Projects Office. The Globe and Mail is not naming the sources as they were not authorized to speak publicly about the negotiations. Current federal rules prohibit tankers from loading and unloading oil along the northern BC coast. The Alberta-Ottawa Memorandum of Understanding that laid the groundwork for the pipeline plan to be unveiled Thursday said Ottawa may consider adjusting the ban, but that piece of the deal appeared to be superseded in a new BC-Ottawa MOU announced by the Carney government in Vancouver on Thursday. Today's Canada-BC agreement also commits to maintaining the federal North Coast tanker ban in accordance with the proposed route of a new trans-provincial pipeline under the bilateral agreement between Canada and Alberta, Mr. Carney said in his remarks on the wide-ranging deal. BC Premier David Eby said Thursday his province's deal with Ottawa doesn't obligate it to support an Alberta pipeline proposal, but he said he also knows his province doesn't have the constitutional ability to stop a pipeline and won't fight it in good faith. That's why this agreement matters, Mr. Eby said during an event with Mr. Carney in Vancouver. It ensures that the northern tanker ban stays in place, and it ensures that if a pipeline goes ahead, that British Columbians are fairly compensated for the environmental risks we would take on any new pipeline project. The Alberta government had scheduled a news conference about the pipeline proposal for Thursday morning, but late Wednesday it announced without explanation that the event was postponed. Mr. Carney and Ms. Smith are now slated to make a joint announcement Thursday evening in Calgary. The Prime Minister's office said it would concern proposed new energy infrastructure to diversify Canadian exports and build a stronger, more sustainable, more competitive economy. So again, this is one that apparently was supposed to be dated, but I don't see where the obvious update was included. But let's go on because there's some additional information here. Alberta had set itself a deadline, a date that was included in the MOU Mr. Carney signed with Ms. Smith on November 27th. Alberta was proposing a series of options for a pipeline route to the northern coast, as well as various ideas for the location of a marine terminal. Ms. Smith said she preferred such an export point because it afforded shorter versus the Vancouver area, and it was deep enough to enable access for the large tankers that are favored for carrying crude long distances. It is not the largest project that has yet to be finalized. This week, the Globe reported that the proposal was still without a private sector proponent, which Mr. Carney later confirmed. The MOU signed by Ms. Smith and Mr. Carney stipulated that any new pipeline would be constructed and financed by the private sector, with co-ownership and economic benefits going to Indigenous peoples. Mr. Carney said Tuesday he was still waiting to see which company or consortium that would be, adding that talks to secure a private backer were going well and that the process will run through the summer. And I'm not quite sure what portion of this is TransCanada and what portion of this is Pembina, because both have been mentioned. And in that other press release I read, it seemed to be that TransCanada was leading the project with Pembina supporting certain things, but Pembina was the company that was highlighted here at this particular point. So maybe that has something to do with the Prime Minister saying at this phase of the process, maybe that TransCanada is the bigger partner, but at this point, Pembina's particular expertise is what's needed most. That would be my best educated guess at this moment. In October, Alberta tapped 3 energy infrastructure companies, Enbridge Incorporated, South Bow Corp, and Trans Mountain Corp, to provide technical and regulatory expertise on its proposal. Greg Ebel, the chief executive of Enbridge, said during a February earnings call that the company was unwilling to take on the financial risk of developing the new line. In May, during the company's annual meeting, he said Enbridge is not a proponent of this pipeline, and frankly, nobody is at this point in time, as the conditions just don't exist to commercialize such a proposal. Asked during a May interview whether Trans Mountain would consider becoming the project's proponent, CBO Mark Mackey said the federal government, which owns the corporation, has expressed a strong desire to have a private proponent move the project forward, but they know very well that we're here and what we're capable of doing. So the federal government happens to own Trans Mountain, which happens to be taking the lead. That might explain why there wasn't that much emphasis on what Trans Mountain's role was versus Pembina's, because the federal government owns the corporation. Okay. All right. That makes sense. South Bow chief executive Bevan Wurzba said in May that he wouldn't speculate on anything to do with the West Coast pipeline, including whether his company would pursue an ownership stake. Another snag in the pipeline negotiations, according to sources, is the lack of an agreement on a massive carbon capture project in the oil sands known as pathways. Ottawa has said the industry must build pathways if the pipeline application is to be fast-tracked by the Major Projects Office, but oil sands developers have been increasingly concerned about the cost of carbon capture venture and say it would require major public subsidies. See, they were looking for public investment in something that was supposed to be all of them. In order to be able to get the right to exploit this new pipeline, they were supposed to cover pathways, and now they were looking for public subsidies. So maybe that also explains why we didn't hear much about that aspect, because maybe there are public subsidies when there are not supposed to be any. The MOU envisages the pipeline plan being designated a project of national interest by October. If that designation is made, the government will assess the project under the Building Canada Act to determine the conditions required for construction and development. Alberta officials have said oil could then flow in a new pipeline by 2033 or 2034. Again, very, very interesting indeed here. I'm going to come back here to the chat and see what we have here from some of the kits. It seems I was frozen at some point. Hopefully that resolved itself. Let's see here. Wow, there's been a lot of chat over the last bit, so I need to go back a little bit here. Kit Saucy, this is about taking customers from the US without saying it outright. Yeah, I can see that. Us being much more reliable for that type of thing, and allowing nations in Asia and perhaps in Europe, if swaps occur for oil like they do for LNG, to make a bet on a nation that's a little more reliable and actually does play by the rules. Let's see, what else do we have here? Kitsasi here says, we don't have to completely throw up our hands. There are many people working on various technologies to deal with pollution, climate change, and disease. It's not an easy or cheap road to take. That's true. Like you say, that's true. We are late to the game, and playing catch up is more expensive. Indeed. We also won't get back some of the things we lost, like glaciers, for thousands of years. Indeed. Kit Linda, just remember that the earth will be fine whether we are living on it or not. Oh boy. Yeah, the earth, the Mother Earth will have a way to self-regulate, that's for sure. It's that, Kit Breen says here, it's that climate change becomes self-initiating after we hit a certain temperature. So to me, the time needed to be now. Indeed. Kitsasi, a sustainable electrical grid is necessary. Canada is a big country, so it's a big task. Indeed. Kitlenda, I'm sure there will be plenty from Ontario and the East Coast who will go to work there, because that's in response to Tabby G asking, I want to know where all the workforce will come from. Indeed. And but that's part of that $6 billion also that had been committed previously to try to boost the number of people in trades, right? And, I think they're looking to get graduates in the hundreds of thousands, either 100,000 or 200,000 new graduates over the next short amount of time. Jolene here says the energy projects with Yukon and BC start connecting the grids is a good plan. It will take a lot to build it due to the environment. Yes, indeed. But we do have to start connecting the grids. That's the best way that we ensure that all the provinces are able to help each other out in times of particular high demand, but that we ensure that we have some east-west connection here if something should go wrong stateside. Great. Yes, not just one project, but many projects that required skilled trades. That is indeed correct, Tabby G. Absolutely here. All right, going back here. Tabby G, that was one great point mentioned in the E.B. Carney announcement, and especially women in the skilled trades. Exactly. There you go. Let's see here. What else do we have? Kit Saucy here. There are also many Canadians working for American companies around the world. I suspect they're about to get offered nice salaries to lead production at home. That is probably very true. Very true. Jolene says, EB also said that we in BC cannot stop it legally as we attempted with TMX and lost. Exactly. Kit Saucy going, EB must be a little more relaxed where Carney is helping with the condo housing. This would help with the workers needed in Alberta. Their families can live in BC while the workers travel to BC. Indeed, that could open that type of opportunity. Let's see. Instant gratification is going to be an issue for Carney. People will want to see things immediately. Indeed, that is true. I guess it will fall to communities to prepare for climate issues, says Kit Breens here. There was some additional funding and stuff announced for things for climate mitigation in case there should be accidents, and the whole strategy, I believe, to have a response in case of disasters. I believe there was some extra money committed to that as well. That didn't get a lot of attention. Kitsasi here goes, it will always be up to communities to combat climate issues, but that may be more effective as we are the ones who understand them. The federal and provincial government can assist with funding. Indeed. Let's see. What else do we have here? Kid Linda going, I think he looked a little tired tonight. Yeah, he probably does, and he probably would be. Didn't have the same zip that he normally has. Let's see here. Really, the individual managing Carney's schedule is likely the one who needs to be, we need to be worried about. Kid Jolene saying, if they can handle Carney's schedule, they will likely have job offers for life. Kid Sassy making the point, I mean, if they use the same area that already has a pipeline, it would be better than pipelines all over the place. Yeah, I would say so. And less number of places to have to monitor as well, right? And if there's to have to build a path to get to in case there's something that needs to be fixed. Kit Saucy saying Alberta would have already had this if they didn't have a hate-on or a hate fetish for Pierre Trudeau. Probably there. I'm not as familiar with the NAP as I probably should be. All right, let's see what else we have here. Kitabi G, the other provinces are required to have their bricks in a row for their projects, right? I feel like I'm watching the first block tumbling in a game of domino. That's quite possible. Let's see here. We have Kit Boomster Black, a new name for us here, saying we just bought another pipeline. What you going to do with yours? As far as it goes, other than using our money, they did pick the lesser of the evils with using the existing path. Yeah. Indeed. It really seems like that's what's going on here. Quote, if this is how far she is from getting the buy-in from Trans Mountain Pathways, might just be finished before the oil starts running. Ay, ay, ay. Indeed. Kid Boomster Black. Do we get a cigarette after they built it with our money this time? Yeah, indeed. Or at least a post-coital cookie. Oh, man. Kid Jolene going, we didn't even get dinner last time. Kid Saucy a pipe with oil-based lube. Oh my god. Kids and Cubs. Kids and Cubs. Portugal defeated Croatia 2-1 at the World Cup. Lady Laura will not be happy about that. She was very much cheering for Croatia in that particular battle. Yes, I imagine that energy media will be hot on this topic indeed, Kit Tavi G. Kit Boomerstick here. Why didn't we sell the one we already own and subsidize? It isn't even running at capacity. Although it does seem that there are plans for it, that it will get to capacity relatively soon enough, from what I'm hearing. But yes, that is indeed a thing. How do you find somebody to make a case to buy one that isn't to be built yet, when the one that you have that is actually profitable doesn't have any buyers? It's a great question. Let's see here. Boom, 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 boom. Going down here, the chats. Jolene saying here, breakdown, has Nenshi and the Alberta NDP have responses already? Okay, that is pretty quick. So hopefully I'll be able to go and bring you some of that. Did the MOU with Alberta mention that they have to find customers as well? That I'm not sure, but I would assume that that would be at the next phase anyway, before you were going to go ahead. That's what's happening with some of those LNG projects, right? That Germany is committed, and then somebody else committed to take certain on. As the project gets more and more real, they have to have some type of capacity, because eventually there's going to be a shareholder decision from whatever company, if there is a company that has shareholders, that is going to bring this forward. And for that shareholder decision to go forward, they certainly would have to have commitments enough from other buyers in order to have that happen. But I believe that that would be significantly later in the process, as was the case for coastal LNG, for example. Kit Boomerstack makes another good point here. So let me get this straight. Alberta's voting on a vote to have a vote. So we're going to buy a pipeline so they stay, or is it a parting gift? Again, yes, indeed. Kitsasi saying here, I am thinking there's a component that keeps ownership of the pipeline for Canadians and Indigenous should Alberta decide to leave, which would make it very expensive to leave for them. Possible. Quite possible. Agreed. Let's see, what else do they have here? Kid Boomster Black says, I'm not really against, especially if they use existing path. It's who gets the money. It would be great if it was the beginning of a UBI system. I would agree there. But given how Danielle Smith seems to feel about AISH recipients getting an extra $200 a month, I'm going to guess that UBI is not really high on her priority list. Wow. Let's see what else we have here. I cover, I'm sending you responses on True Eager. Okay. Thank you so much. Let's see. If you understand NEP, you understand Alberta for the most part. Yes, indeed. I know that. It was more the part that I don't understand about NEP, because I keep on reading different analyses about it. And, some of them saying that basically based on what's happening now, had they gone ahead with NEP back then, they actually would be better off overall. But the other component I heard about NEP is that when they brought it in and what happened to oil prices, when oil prices were doing well, that's what sort of turned people around it, because they weren't getting the maximum that they would have gotten otherwise. But then when the oil crisis hit, Alberta didn't suffer as much as it would have as well, because the NEP managed to mitigate somehow or dampen the effect of losses. So that's sort of the versions that I have heard. And of course, there would have been the whole part of continuing on with Peter Lougheed's project on the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which was also abandoned. So all that kind of stuff kind of goes together. But I don't have enough expertise for someone to have actually demystified it for me, yet. A definitive answer that I can trust, that had we gone forward with the NEP thing back at the time and adhered to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, well, somebody doing the math, would Alberta be better off today than it is? I think that's probably is the case, but it would be nice if somebody would actually do the work and present like some definitive, authoritative accounting. Let's see, what else do we have here? So it's nice to see some proud Albertans here. Kit Boomster Black says, I'm a Canadian in Alberta. My son has been moved from AISH ADAP. I've been fighting this for close to a year, and the keeping CPP thing, maybe or maybe not kicked out of the Premier's town hall twice. So you've been getting up to some good trouble, I see. I tried giving her my Trump Peace Prize trophy, but security wouldn't let me. Kid Jolene, I'm so proud of my fellow Canadians in Alberta. We see the way you guys and gals are standing up. Indeed. All right, kits and cubs. So let me see if there's something a little extra yet in the news reports. There might be something now on the Government of Canada site. There you go. It's there. Maybe we'll be able to get a little bit more information, perhaps even on the pathways part. Let's see here. What's written? Prime Minister Mark Carney today announced that the Government of Canada will refer the Government of Alberta's proposal for a West Coast pipeline project to the Major Projects Office. So that's basically our share of the announcement at the moment. This pipeline would transport 1 million barrels per day of oil towards global markets. The proposed route will largely follow the existing Trans Mountain Corridor and will fully respect the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. Sorry, not our, but the Government of Canada's major part of the proposal here. It says Canada and Alberta will each share equal partnership in the project, and there will be a meaningful equity stake reserved for Indigenous peoples. Consultations with representatives will begin immediately. Pembina Pipeline Corporation will be a private sector investor and will contribute its expertise to the project's development, which will be led by Trans Mountain Corporation. With the government's stake in this project, we will act as catalysts, creating additional opportunity for private investment as the project advances. This is a historic partnership between government, the private sector, and Indigenous peoples to build nation-changing infrastructure that unlocks our resources and delivers them to global markets. This moment is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Canada is moving quickly to seize it. You might have heard that the head of the IEA, International Energy Association, has been making the case about Canada just 3 days ago. At CTV News by Abigail Binman, there was an article here that said Canada has, quote, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to become an energy superpower, says the head of the IEA, is Fatih Birol. And this article here says, the head of the International Energy Agency says the current geopolitical moment presents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Canada to be a real energy export superpower, but it needs to move quickly. In a fireside conversation with Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne on Monday, Fatih Birol said trust and predictability should be at the center of Canada's export strategy, given the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has had on the world and the resulting desire for stable energy sources. Birol said countries are generally willing to pay more for energy that doesn't create any geopolitical threat, and Canada has, quote, huge potential. This is Birol's second visit to Canada in 6 weeks. He made similar comments about Canada's potential and its need to move quickly at a fireside chat with Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson in Ottawa in May. Birol also met with Prime Minister Mark Carney during the same visit. Since then, Birol said he's met with many governments and knows many nations have reached out to Canada interested in its energy industry, with more and more countries to come. Champagne echoed that. Quote, even those who produce it in the Middle East, believe it or not, are calling us. They're saying now, we don't produce in your country so that we can even out our terms. Sorry, why don't we produce in your country so that we can even out in terms of the risk, Champagne said. Wow, if that's the case, what Trump did in Iran not only backfired on him, but may have ended up doubly good for us. Champagne also talked about playing, quote, a key role for Europe and the Asia Pacific region, noting Japan and South Korea specifically. He referenced the understanding that even if the Strait of Hormuz issue is resolved, there are concerns a similar crisis could happen down the line, if not there, then in another straits choke point elsewhere in the world. And again, this is one of the things that we were mentioning about Iraq looking now to go through Syria to find another way, because even if Iran is going to have control of the Strait of Hormuz and people know that they're willing to shut it down, maybe they're just trying to find ways now to bypass. And these are things that may have changed the math and the calculus on whether or not pipelines for Canada are viable. But like I said, there is a moment at the right now where everybody's thinking this way, and this is where the head of the IEA is coming in with these comments. Much of the conversation as part of the IEA's 11th annual global conference on energy efficiency in Montreal centered around nuclear and electricity in terms of key energy sources. Birol said he's been referencing the age of electricity for the past 2.5 years, saying while global energy demand is growing, the global demand for electricity is growing 3 times faster. People often say demography is destiny. I would put it to you that energy is destiny, said Champagne, adding that electricity in particular is becoming key as everyone is trying to decarbonize. In addition to citing how Canada is, quote, one of the few countries that can certify a nuclear reactor and, quote, will be the first in the G7 to have small modular reactors, Champagne also talked about the idea of selling Canada's nuclear industry as a service. Quote, we can bring our technology and our know-how into countries. Think about Eastern Europe. Think about a number of countries who have looked at the can-do Canada deuterium uranium reactors, Champagne said, citing enormous opportunities for Canada to play a key role. Birol said one of the new drivers of electricity are data centers for artificial intelligence. He noted that it is very important for Canada, which has seen a lot of interest. According to Birol, a medium-sized data center uses the same amount of electricity as a town with 100,000 households. He spoke about the not medium but huge data centers being built around the world which need electricity 24/7. Across Canada, there has been a push for more data centers, mentioned as part of the federal government's new AI strategy, as well as pushback in part about energy demands. Quote, whomever wins the AI race wins the geopolitical upper hand, said Birol, adding tech companies will choose countries with access to plentiful, cheap electricity 24/7. Canada has committed to doubling its electricity grid by 2050. Birol believes the race for AI data centers will push the development of more SMRs fast. You are coming first, Canada, but other countries, of course, are in the race, he said. Birol also shared that despite all the attention AI data centers have been getting, they are not the single biggest driver of global electricity consumption. Quote, you will be surprised, it's the exponential increase of sales of air conditioners in the world. Yeah, indeed. Birol said as a growing number of nations see an increase in household income and face rising temperatures, they are buying more air conditioners. He said currently 18% of households in Indonesia have air conditioners, 20% in India, and 5% in Nigeria, but those numbers are increasing. He said the difficulty with countries like Indonesia or India is that powering the same air conditioner requires 3 times the amount of electricity than required in Japan due to a lack of norms or standards or regulations. He said the IEA is working to identify best practices and set an example for countries to adopt policies for things like air conditioners and refrigerators. Quote, if you have the right air conditioner, you have to build less power plants there and have the same comfort, Birol said. In response, Champagne talked about the difference heat pumps are making and said the government has been incentivizing Canadians to switch to more efficient ways to heat and cool their homes. So there you have it, kits and cubs, a little bit of extra information from the International Energy Agency and how it applies to some of this. Let's go back to some of your comments here. Let's see. Talking about seafood now. All right. Nothing specific here to be mentioned. Let's keep going back and seeing whether or not there's some extra analysis Alberta pipeline. So Global News has a piece here that says, talks about Mark Carney juggling Alberta's pipeline push with BC environment concerns. And it's not an article. It seems to be a video thing. So that is not going to be particularly helpful to us at the moment. So I'm guessing that this is pretty much all that we have for now. Oh yes, Kit Uncovered told me, yes, that there was some reaction that has been sent to me. So let's take a little look here. So again, one of the things I mentioned, again, we've had BC and Alberta setting the table for what was happening today with their various announcements, and just wanting to know again, any source that's providing you with a hot take analysis that either singles out or excludes one of the major three pieces is not taking you seriously. So if nobody's talking about what happened in BC today, nobody's talking to you about Pembina coming into Alberta and wanting to be the energy component that would provide the bring your own energy to a potential AI data center to come, and what that means for Danielle Smith trying to create a new client base for the gas for whom industry for whom she seems to be propping up. So she's not looking at less production. She's probably looking at shifting it to another client in order to keep that industry alive for even longer. And then the actual pipeline announcement. If people are making giving you hot take analyses that don't include all of these three elements, or that's really highlighting one and diminishing another, they're probably not taking you seriously. And then, of course, right, there will be probably more solid analysis that will emerge 72 to 96 hours from now. At 48, given that we just got off a long weekend, people that are taking extra days off to make it. Some people are making it a 5-day long weekend. I wouldn't even be surprised if we have to wait till Monday to start gearing some, or Tuesday of next week to get some very serious takes. But for the people that are junkies and that won't take it, that won't take any time off, probably 72 to 96 hours, we are going to start getting some actually serious takes on this that are looking at more aspects than just one element, or this recently came out. So just taking a look here, whether there's more stuff. Okay, doesn't seem to be here. Let's go to the chat, and we have Kit. Okay, let's see. I'm not exactly sure where you sent them to me, Kit Uncover. I'm not seeing them where I would normally look, but that's okay. I'll stumble upon them eventually. We have the breakdown. Which very much I want to put it, doesn't put the Prime Minister in the best possible light. It seems I am frozen. Hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, I'm now unfrozen, which is good. So there's this here. There we go. Bring some of this to you, kits and cubs. Hopefully it is showing for you. The computer has decided that it's going to start being slow for some reason. I am so sorry for this. I do not know why it is doing that, but it is. So here we have meme. I told them we were partnering with industry. Industry's role is mostly just us watching us pay for it. Indeed, that is indeed what it looks like. Again, it looks like, from what I'm understanding more from the deal, that Trans Mountain, which is a company owned by the government of Canada because we purchased that pipeline, is going to be the main proponent, along with the government of Alberta. They are going to split it half and half, except for the portion of money that is going to go into the fund to help Indigenous communities participate in the project, which is federal money. And whatever portion that Pembina might put towards it eventually, but they're not committing anything now, which could be 10% of it and up to another 10%. That's probably pipeline capacity, would translate into later pipeline capacity that they would buy. And then hopefully as that project moves further ahead, there'll be more private proponents that come in to buy some pipeline capacity on it. But again, the whole responsibility for the build and everything is indeed going to come back to us. So it does look indeed like we decided to buy another pipeline. So the main difference between this one and TMX, like we said, is that because we bought TMX in its entirety, right, the capacity on the pipeline, the revenue comes to us. This one, it looks like they might be willing to sell an equity stake in exchange for purchasing capacity in the pipeline, which would make it a little bit different and might get more people to want to buy in. But doesn't look like they are going to participate too much in the construction fees. Again, as I'm saying, buying an equity stake in exchange for the capacity. I guess that I guess there's a way you can make that type of deal. But yeah, definitely, we're definitely far off from what it is that we were looking at the beginning. So let me see with regard to the breakdown, whether there is more there that we can see with regard to that. So yes, don't think of it as spending, think of it as an investment part. We have Rob Anderson saying, will cost the taxpayers nothing. Chris, taxpayers will make billions in return on investment off just the pipeline alone, and hundreds of billions more off royalties, taxes, and economic activity. Celebrate the win. It's a good day. That's in response to Chris Sims of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, responding by saying, after listing some of the government's strangled pipelines that companies give up on because the government stood in the way, Smith explains why taxpayers will now be on the hook. And her right-hand man trying to pretend that this is not going to be publicly funded in any way, shape, or form, that this will cost taxpayers nothing, because eventually taxpayers will make billions. So basically, Rob Anderson saying that the project will pay for itself, much in the same way that Trudeau said the budget will balance itself. It's amazing how the budget will balance itself works for a pipeline to the West Coast, but it doesn't work for actual budgeting in the minds of conservatives. Interesting. It says here, Nenshi and the Alberta NDP have responded to Smith's pipeline announcement with support. No mention of the taxpayer liability or the climate impact. The cultural shift of the NDP to a more centrist position is pretty clear. Will that boost their appeal? For immediate release, July 2nd, 2026, statement, major projects announcement, welcome news for Alberta. Naheed Nenshi, leader of the official opposition of Alberta, issued the following statement. Today's news is welcome. Alberta needs pipelines to safely get our product to markets in Asia. Alberta's NDP has long advocated for a southern pipeline route with the while the UCP wasted time and money on a non-feasible northern route. We are very pleased to see the southern line progress. We are also pleased to see progress on pathways after so many years. It's a critical step to future-proof our oil sands production. Canada works best when we work together, and we are pleased the federal government is working to get projects done, even as Danielle Smith actively tries to undermine the country with a referendum on separation. So Nenshi agreeing with the project, but giving all the credit to the federal government. Huh, interesting. There appears to be some document that the breakdown has received, so that's something we'll have to go and look and find that seems to have much more details. I'm going to guess that this might be retelling of what it is from the government of Alberta's side here. There's lots of information here that I'm noticing, but let's take a look at this. It says the project is estimated to cost between $35.2 to $43.7 billion. Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, Trans Mountain Corporation, and Pembina Pipeline Corporation will be responsible for the project's development costs and associated risks and liabilities through to the operation stage. Says, I'm going to guess this is documents from the government of Alberta. I did not get the sense of that from the announcement today. It says here, the lower end estimate of this range assumes that there will be savings from regulatory reform and other opportunities. A final investment decision is anticipated between Q1 of 2028 and Q4 of 2029, with construction to start early works between 2027 and 2029. Construction completion is forecast for 2032-34. To date, the government of Alberta has invested $18.3 million in the project. It's useful to compare these cost estimates to the Trans Mountain Expansion Project, which was completed in 2024 at the cost of approximately $30 billion. In today's dollars, that would be closer to $35.3 billion. It's also important to understand that the West Coast Oil Pipeline is a much bigger project than the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. The West Coast Oil Pipeline project design includes a longer and wider pipeline, carries a much higher volume of oil, requiring more powerful pumps, includes more working storage capacity, and has larger marine loading facilities. Despite this larger scope, the project is expected to consider efficiencies and to cost less per barrel than the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. It is being alleged here. Says here, with regard to climate goals, greenhouse gas emissions will occur during both construction and operation. Construction emissions are expected to be about 1.4 to 1.5 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent and occur from activities like equipment use, temporary power generation, and workforce accommodation. Operational emissions are expected to be about 0.2 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year and will come from running the pipeline, including pump stations, terminal facilities, and supporting infrastructure. Upstream emissions will increase if the project leads to additional oil production. Estimates suggest these could range around 15.5 to 18.2 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year from 2032 to 2041, depending on the type of oil transported and how much new production occurs. If the oil would have been produced anyway and is redirected from existing export routes, the project may have limited effect on total Canadian upstream emissions. Pipeline transportation produces fewer emissions than moving oil by rail. By reducing the need for crude by rail, the project can lower transportation emissions. If the proposed pipeline replaces the same volume of oil shipped by rail over a similar distance, about 1.05 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent could be avoided each year. The all-Canadian route may also support a more consistent emission strategy and use lower emission electricity than some cross-border alternatives. That's very nice to say, but I doubt it's going to be a factor because I doubt that the purpose of producing this pipeline is to displace all the oil that's already being shipped by rail. So I believe that the goal of this project is to be accretive, to add to the overall amount of oil that is being shipped, not displace oil being shipped by rail instead, and not to generate more. Canadian oil transported by the project would have a lower emissions intensity than some alternative heavy crude oils supplied to Asian markets by other countries. If it replaces higher emission sources, global upstream emissions could be reduced by about 4.8 to 6.5 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year from 2032 to 2041. This is the argument that if you use this energy to displace other energy that's dirtier that would be used, this is how many savings that could be in reductions in megatons of carbon dioxide that could be achieved globally. Of course, the assumption here again being that Alberta somehow gets to take credit for this, which they don't. We get to take credit for any reductions we get if we can reduce the intensity per barrel in the production and the getting it to whatever destination it needs to go. But a company that decides to replace coal, let's say, by this and thus reduces their GHGs, they would get the credit for doing that. There's absolutely no reason why they would just let us have the benefit just because we pumped it out and put it on a ship. The government of Alberta has also completed extensive modeling on the competitiveness and incremental cost to industry, including for the Oil Sands Alliance, which has agreed to remove 16 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year by 2045. Carbon capture and other technologies are expected to lower overall carbon intensity while maintaining economic competitiveness and growth in the oil sands sector. The project would include emissions reduction measures such as efficient construction practices, minimizing land disturbance, and potential electrification of facilities, and would also operate under applicable emissions regulations. Upstream producers are expected to continue adopting technologies such as carbon capture, methane reduction, and efficiency improvements, which have already lowered emissions intensity over time. So if we are looking to something that causes at the most 15.5 to 18.2 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year from 2032 to 2041. And I believe that the Pathways project is destined to remove 16 megatons. It becomes, for all intents and purposes, a 1-for-1 when this is running at full capacity, and maybe not even 1-to-1, maybe a little less than that. So it in terms of net additions, carbon additions might not mean a lot once it is fully built and everything on both sides is running and running as planned, but that's a lot of ifs. That's a lot of ifs. And it certainly doesn't do anything to reduce our current numbers, right? If the project was bigger, and I guess it was supposed to be bigger, that was probably the goal, was to offset all of the emissions that could be created by this when it was running at capacity and put a dent in what we were producing already. That doesn't seem like it will happen. Again, some is better than none if this actually goes through and can be proven to work. But probably not the best at this moment. All right, kids and cubs, that seems to be about all I've got for you with regard to this. Let's see one more time. I believe there was something I was reading from the Government of Canada that I may not have finished. Yes, indeed, there was. So let's get back to that, and then that will probably be all for today. With the government's stake in this project, we will act as catalysts, creating additional opportunity for private investment as the project advances. This is a historic partnership between government, the private sector, and Indigenous peoples to build nation-changing infrastructure that unlocks our resources and delivers them to global markets. This moment is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Canada is moving quickly to seize it. The Major Projects Office will now initiate the process for the pipeline's potential listing as a national interest project under the Building Canada Act, and immediately begin consultations with Indigenous groups, provinces, and territories. Listing under the Act means that the project will undergo a streamlined review that upholds rigorous environmental standards and fully respects the rights of Indigenous peoples, while streamlining the federal permitting process. Should the project be listed as one of national importance by the MPO, it will be subject to the conditions set by the office. Throughout this process, the MPO will engage with the Government of British Columbia, and all decisions will be informed by meaningful consultations with Indigenous communities. To ensure Alberta will export some of the lowest carbon intensity oil in the world, the Government of Canada, the Government of Alberta, and the Oil Sands Alliance have reached an agreement to advance construction of the Pathways project. Pathways will be one of the world's largest carbon capture and storage projects, and alongside other emissions reductions commitments in this agreement, it will achieve 16 million tons of emissions reductions per year. So the Pathways project on its own won't achieve 16 million. It's 16 million that with alongside other emissions reductions commitments in this agreement. Again, that adds yet more ifs. Together, the construction and operation of a West Coast pipeline project and the Pathways project will create approximately 175,000 new jobs in Alberta and British Columbia, as well as across the country. In addition to the economic development opportunity inherent in Indigenous peoples participating and holding an ownership stake in the pipeline, the project will generate significant economic opportunity for Indigenous communities through business development, contracting opportunities, jobs, training, and opportunities for equity ownership. The initiatives announced today reflect the Memorandum of Understanding between the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta, reached in November 2025, and its implementation agreement reached on May 15, 2026. The agreement reached with Oil Sands Alliance gives industry the certainty they need to invest and build. It includes major commitments to sustainability and unlocks our world-class natural resources. This is cooperative federalism at work. Today's agreement realizes the enormous potential of Canada and Alberta when we build together. In a more dangerous and divided world, Canada is focused on what we can control. We are building our strength at home, diversifying our export partners, and fulfilling our potential as an energy superpower. So yes, it seems that the big figure that the federal government is going to push is the opportunity to unlock $200 billion of new investment across the country, and Canada becoming the global supplier of choice for our allies and partners around the world. That's what he's probably going to use to justify the fact that it's looking like they sold out on the principle of this being a project that was private proponent led, specifically. Now, again, as a pragmatist and risk manager, if the Prime Minister sees that this is indeed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in the way that the head of the IEA presented it and basically took the opinion that hell or high water, this is going to happen, it's going to happen fast, and whatever political hits he needs to take, he's going to take because it just needs to be done now to take advantage of the opportunity now. That could unlock $200 billion worth of new investment. And if that happens fast enough, and if he does it early enough in the mandate, people might not be so upset when it comes time to vote again. This could be a calculus. He does have some political capital in terms of his lead. So he might as well spend it. He's not going to lose any ground to the Conservatives on this, but he may have opened a door and a window wide enough for the federal NDP to walk through quite enthusiastically here with this. Danielle Smith, of course, will say that, quote, a West Coast pipeline will create tens of thousands of jobs, generate tens of billions in new provincial and federal revenues, and make Canada more secure and self-reliant. But what she's really going to claim here is what's the second part of this quote. Alberta has done its part by putting forward a responsible world-class proposal and selecting the strongest route to Canada's West Coast. She wants you to consider that Alberta has done its part, and if from now on, if things fail, it's not her fault. She still doesn't have a proponent, although that doesn't seem like it's going to matter. Scott Burrows, President and Chief Executive Officer, Pembina, says the project represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to advance nation-building energy infrastructure that strengthens Canada's economy and expands access to global markets for Canadian energy. We are proud to participate in this national priority that brings together the Government of Canada, the Province of Alberta, Indigenous partners, and industry. Let's see what it is here. So yes, the pipeline itself create up to 140,000 jobs expected. The Pathways project will contribute more than $16 billion to Canada's GDP and support more than 40,000 jobs annually. They say that this builds on today's announcement with Alberta. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Premier of British Columbia David Eby signed the new Canada-British Columbia Cooperative Prosperity Agreement. So we mentioned that earlier. Let's see what else. All this builds on recent progress by Canada and Alberta, and it builds on the agreement in principle to reduce oil and gas methane emissions by 75% below 2014 levels by 2035 in Alberta. It meets the goal of implementing a streamlined and flexible impact assessment process to get major infrastructure built faster. And it, let's see here, translates a shared intent into economic growth and investment, which includes developing priority projects, increasing Alberta's oil and gas and electricity production, and advancing progress towards net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, when we are talking about framework to implement growth and investment in Alberta specifically. Yep. And those are the major things. It's just a little extra talk about other major projects and how this fits in with all of them into the overall strategy of increasing our output and our economic activity. So there, kids and cubs, I think we have it. There's nothing much more to add at the moment. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting for the Conservatives to fight against it. The federal Conservatives only seem to have the fact that it's not going through the northern route. It seems that the government of BC and the government of Alberta are quite happy and fine with that now, so that's going to leave Pierre Poilievre screaming alone about that. We still need to see what the conditions of pathways are and whether or not it's going to achieve the goals that are stated, or whether or not it's going to end up being reduced even more. There is, like we mentioned, the semblance that this is going to be pretty much all public money buying this and getting this built. So there is going to be, again, probably not very much opportunity for the Conservatives to attack this again, because it is coming from Danielle Smith. However, the NDP is definitely going to have a field day with this federally. It's going to increase the schism between the federal NDP and the provincial NDP, both in British Columbia, because the cooperative agreement with British Columbia is going to see all those other projects move forward, and therefore David Eby probably won't want to have Avi Lewis screaming too loud. Definitely in the case of Alberta, given that Naheed Nenshi has come out in support of it, didn't really have much choice, really, if he hopes to supplant Danielle Smith as the next premier. But that's not going to help with their relationships with Avi Lewis. And as you know, as soon as Avi Lewis was named the leader, Naheed Nenshi, 30 seconds hadn't even passed, where Naheed Nenshi came out and said, nope, not my boss. And you can see that at the federal level. You can say Naheed Nenshi's boss. It's like, it was very clear, from second one, that Nenshi and Lewis are not on the same side of things and are probably not going to get along, and probably won't help much with the NDP leadership in Manitoba as well, given that Premier Canoe has seemed to have had a more pragmatist bent on a resource development as well. So this is not going to help the federal NDP and the provincial wings sort of get back together. That schism is going to definitely become stronger. Not sure how that's going to reflect in Nova Scotia, because there was some polling today, Kits and Cubs, that came out from Polling Canada that indicated that if an election were to be held today in Nova Scotia, specifically, that Premier Houston and the Progressive Conservatives there would have quite a big problem. Quite a big problem indeed. It says here that this is according to narrative polling, but it says that if an election were held today, and I'm going to put this up on screen for you, that the NDP in the province of Nova Scotia would pick up 45%. The Conservatives would pick up 29%, the Liberals 23%, and the Greens 1%. So that looks like it could potentially be a majority government. for the NDP, and if that Wind West project does go ahead, it is certain that a lot of people would feel much more comfortable with that going ahead with the NDP managing it, particularly if people are wondering if some of that energy production would be used for the benefit of Nova Scotians and not just be something that is getting ready to be sold to Americans, for example. Some additional, since we're looking at it, why not? Some additional polling information. This one from New Brunswick indicating that the Liberal Party in New Brunswick still doing relatively well with 41%. The Progressive Conservative Party 30%, the Greens at 13%, others 9%, and the NDP 6% in New Brunswick. So despite the fact that Susan Holt had a big drop in her personal approval numbers, according to the latest quarterly Angus Reid survey, indicating here that at least in terms of the fortunes of her party, not too much is being affected in a negative way here. In Newfoundland and Labrador, it's still pretty close, showing the Progressive Conservatives at 38% and the Liberals at 37%, with the NDP at 25%. And here the changes are definitely in favor of the NDP, because this is a change recorded since the recent election that they had in 2025. Let's see if I can just bring this a little larger. There you go. That might help. So we're showing that the Conservatives have dropped 6 points, the Liberals have dropped 7, but the NDP have picked up 17% on what's been happening there. So some very interesting public opinion polling. And another piece of public opinion polling that might be rather surprising. There we go. The Nova Scotia numbers, I said Canadian polling did do the analysis, and it would indeed indicate an NDP majority, with the NDP picking up 31 seats, the PCs 16, the Liberals 8, and other parties picking up 1 with those numbers. With the New Brunswick numbers, I showed it would still be a Liberal majority in New Brunswick, with the Liberals taking 30 seats, the PCs 15, and the Greens 4. So let's see, what else do we have here? In Prince Edward Island, there's also some polling that has been done, and I'm trying to see by who. There we go. And this one is offering quite a surprise, because if I remember correctly, it's the Conservatives who are leading in Prince Edward Island, right? Rob Lance, yes, the leader of the Conservative Party. He was the interim one. They had a leadership race. He decided to enter, and he won. This is a monumental shift. Now, Prince Edward Island usually there's usually not much polling of it at all, and the margin of error is usually pretty high. But indicating here, kids and cubs, that if an election were held today, that the PEI Greens would actually form government right now. That's amazing. The PCs are down 38 points since the 2023 election at the moment, almost all to the benefit of the Greens, who are up 32, and the Liberals pick up 9. That is absolutely phenomenal here. But it looks like the Greens would run away with it, according, this is narrative polling that did this sampling in Prince Edward Island, and indicating here, according to the folks at Polling Canada, that that would translate to, in terms of seats in the PEI legislature. Let's see if hopefully I can pick this up for you here. Where is it? 23 seats for the Greens, 4 for the Liberals, and the Progressive Conservatives would actually be wiped out. Wow. That is absolutely really interesting. Wow. Uh, I am sure that Elizabeth, these are numbers that would make Elizabeth May very, very happy. Especially as she's on her way out. But yeah, so right now it looks like there would be a certain amount of upheaval in the maritime provinces. I'm not sure whether or not the numbers in Newfoundland and Labrador would indicate that how seats are falling. This would be a change, and Tony Wakeham would already be gone. Um, but still, this is, like I said, a very close horse race in Newfoundland and Labrador with the NDP picking up a lot. The Greens would flip the government in Prince Edward Islands. The NDP would flip the government in Nova Scotia, and the Liberals would remain healthily ahead and still in a majority government in New Brunswick. That is absolutely phenomenal news. Yeah, Kits and Cubs. Not sure again. For example, we're going to be hearing a lot more about Claudia Chender over the next little while. She's probably going to get a lot more profile. She's the leader of the NDP in Nova Scotia, and made a very good impression during the last election. It seems that impression keeps on being better. So yeah, Kits and Cubs. Yeah, exactly right. Kits Sassy going green. Interesting. And Linda, haven't we observed before that Greens are sane conservatives who believe in climate change? Yes, indeed. Indeed, absolutely. But yeah, absolutely. Kid Sassy going, the polls are that bad? Yeah, the polls are that bad. They really are, especially federally as well for the progressive conservatives. The polls are that bad. So yeah. But yeah, you know what? Since we're all together, let's go take a look at that, because the federal numbers were updated by 38 Canada on Sunday. So let's see what they seem to have here. We didn't look at them. A slight little uptick for the Liberals federally, a slight little downtick for the Conservatives nationally, a slight little downtick for the NDP as well. The Bloc doing a little worse. The Greens doing a little better. It's not big movement, but there's a little. I'll show it to you here. Get some clubs, and let's get this up here. All right, is that up? Just stalling here for a second. Not sure. There we go. Yeah, that took a little longer than I expected it to. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. So yeah, what we're seeing here is that the last reporting period was showing Liberals 44, Conservatives 35. We're showing Liberals 45, Conservatives 35, but it's still a little dip here on the 35 if you're looking at the numbers. We're seeing the NDP still at 10%, but a little dip lower. The Bloc at 6. The Greens have increased from 1% support. The last time they recorded that was, let's see, November 9th, and then they went up to about 2%, hit 3% for a little while. So yeah, they're slowly increasing, getting to 3% here. If we're looking at the seat projection, after a couple weeks of decline, the Liberals hit a maximum of 221, showing on May 17th, with the Conservatives at 94. And then the Liberals were declining slowly to about 201. They're back up to 207 here, with the Conservatives at 102. looking at the smaller parties here, the Greens still solidly will be picking up 2. The NDP had hit 13, which would be official party status, are back down to about 11. The Bloc Québécois staying in a range of between 20 and 22, where they've been for a decent amount of time if an election were being held today. So that's looking at some federal numbers. And if we're looking at some other parties, since we're here, or other situations, let's see what we have here. British Columbia. Given that we have some announcements here being made today. So going into these announcements, if we're looking at British Columbia, it is indicating that if an election had been held on Friday, last Sunday, that the Conservatives would pick up 54, the NDP would pick up 37. Even though the polling is pretty good, shows 44 for the Conservatives, 40 for the NDP, and the BC Greens at 11. So just the way that the seats are panning out in close races are not favoring the NDP right now, but it's definitely not. There's definitely not a runaway lead in terms of popular support for the Conservatives. On the Alberta side, I'm looking at the gap that was recorded on April 12th, showed the UCP at 52 and the NDP at 38. That has closed down to UCP 51, NDP 40. So a 14% gap, now reduced to an 11-point gap. Not much activity from the smaller parties. The Progressive Tory Party of Alberta has increased a little bit from 2% up to 3%, a little bit, but no big changes there. But in terms of seat count, also looking at the recent highest gap was showing on April 12th, the UCP would pick up 63 seats and the NDP 24 for a 39-seat gap. That are now showing UCP 58, NDP 29 for a 29-seat gap here. But the UCP far above the majority of 44 that is required. Looking at some key races here. Ontario, if there's anything new that has come up lately. We're still at not much more here. Just last numbers from June 28th showing the PCs at 38, the Ontario Liberals at 35%, the NDP at 19, the Greens at 5, and how that translates into seats. 58 PC, 38 Liberals, 28 NDP, and Greens 2, with 1 independent, but not a majority for Doug Ford in that context. Moving on to the province of Quebec, now that there has been more time for that big announcement between the federal government and the province of Quebec to marinate. Let's see if there's any additional movement in the polls for Madame Fréchette. It's indicating here, taking a look. Oh, yes, the Parti Québécois decline continues to 30%. The Liberals' decline continues along with it to 28% with the CAQ, and now coming in at 21%. The Conservative Party of Quebec at 13 and Quebec Solidaire to 9. When we are looking at seat counts, however, still no big push up for the CAQ, but it's now at 12 seats. And again, we were looking at 0 not too long ago. The Parti Québécois at 6, they need 60, they need 64 for majority. The Liberals in at 39 here. The Parti Conservateur du Québec picking up 9 and Quebec Solidaire 7 in this type of parliament. That would be a very interesting parliament, very much a pizza parliament with those numbers. It would still be nice to see the Parti Québécois come down to earth just a little bit more when it comes to that. So yeah, those are the major areas that we see at the moment. and how public opinion polling is affecting that. So that's the overall mood throughout the country. A little more action going on in the east of the country with some appetite for change than out in the west. The west, the only part where we see some appetite for change is British Columbia, if we're looking at seat count. But then again, in public polling numbers, the top line numbers, it's almost within the margin of error, or if not in the margin of error. Okay, so now that I've done all of that, that's all I've got for you, kits and cubs. I think that's about all the context that we can get for now. So thank you so much for tuning in, kits and cubs. It's was really nice to be able to share this watch party with you. There's going to be a lot coming out of this, and I'm very, very certain that there is going to be a lot of consternation from people who care a lot about the environment. And there's probably going to be some consternation. So that will be from the left and from the right, probably the fact that the federal government is going to have to be putting a lot more money into this. The right is going to have a much harder time making its argument, because they would have to go against Alberta in order to make it and poo-poo on this deal when it's the premier of Alberta is trying to sell it, and she does not like to be contradicted and told no and defied a lot. So if they don't want to create a bit of a civil war element there, they're only going to be able to go so far. On the left, however, the federal NDP was going to have a field day on this. The Greens might as well. The federal NDP might have a problem, though, because of the lack of support of its provincial factions that might want to be tearing down the federal leader as not being practical enough on this. This is going to create an opportunity for the federal Conservatives to try to smear the provincial leaders, claiming that Avi Lewis is their boss. They're going to be pushing back against that, which actually could open a better door for the Greens at this particular time. If the NDP federally has to take on this fight while fighting its provincial wings, whereas the Greens do not. Like I said, they could potentially emerge with this issue as being the go-to party once again for people who care about environmental concerns rather than the NDP. It's really going to depend on how Avi Lewis plays this. I don't see him soft pedaling. I see him going really hard on this in order to be able to draw contrast, which could work for him a little bit federally. But again, it could be one of those cases where you make the case and you draw support away from the Liberals. But then once you make that case, you then have to fight with the Greens in order to convince Canadians that you are the best placed to make this argument and to fight for the future. And again, the more people get to know Avi Lewis, that could either solidify their trust in him, or if the more sort of left-wing militant, not willing to compromise aspect comes out, it could push people who are environmentally minded but still somewhat pragmatist or practical more into the arms of the Greens, particularly if they come up with a different policy proposal. The NDP's saving grace is that the Greens are probably more purist on this than they are, and probably would not do that. If the Greens do adopt their conservatives who recycle type background, more likely then the Greens would be able to take a better position. But the Greens also have a very, very active, very fundamentalist, non-compromise wing when it comes to things on the matter of the environment. So there's lots of opportunities for people to step up to take advantage of weakness from other parties, but it would require them having to make some fundamental changes about how they present themselves, and those might not be easy to make. Indeed, Kit Cassie, the federal NDP, should have accepted Wobb's advice. Yep, you nailed it, Cassie. They closed the door too much, too fast, too quickly on that, and didn't leave themselves enough wiggle room. Okay, kids and cubs, that's the end of this episode of a special breaking report about the implementation pipeline. We hope the pipeline implementation. We hope that you love listening to us because we love making this for you. Remember, sharing is caring. Word of mouth is priceless. So please tell your peeps and poops all about us. And of course, when you share a little word of yourself about why it is that our content resonates with you, that helps us a lot. Right? I'm just going to cut it at that because we're at well over 3 hours and I need to get myself to bed if I'm going to do a morning show tomorrow, where a couple of these things are going to be repeated, of course. So I apologize in advance for being repetitive tomorrow. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Kids and cubs, it could be a tough world out there. Please be kind to and gentle with yourself. Of course, if you believe that our show deserves some support, please scan this QR code, which brings you to our coffee page, and make a donation to support the Beaver Lodge. You can also support us on YouTube, and you can also give us a direct bank transfer at truenortheagerbeaver@gmail.com. If you wish to avoid the USCE Tech Bros, we appreciate all of your support there. This QR code brings us to our YouTube page if you're not there already, so you can smash with our buttons like, share, and subscribe. And if you are watching this fewer than 7 days after it goes live and you're watching it on your tablet and your iPhone, please swipe left on the comment section to offer us some hype points that offers smaller viewer channels like ours the opportunity to get presented in front of the eyes of more people. So we thank you for all of that. At the count of 3, kids and cubs, may I please have you say, Mr. Beaver, please cue the cock on 1, 2, and 3. I hear you, and since you asked so nicely, here's a little cock-a-doodle-doo just for you. Amour et bisous, and we'll see you tomorrow. You are listening to a True North Eager Beaver Media Incorporated podcast. The True North Eager Beaver podcasts are proudly brought to you by our founding sponsors, the Misfit Mysteries from Corvid Moon Publishing, your source for science fiction, fantasy, and cozy mysteries featuring a broad diversity of characters, CanadianTarot.com, their uniquely Canadian online eclectic tarot community, and the Peppermaster, hot pepper sauces made from farm-fresh ingredients to thrill your taste buds and expand your mind. We are grateful to the Crier Media Network for its support, Pete Jarvis for our artwork, and Paul Joseph Something for our opening and closing sequence music.